Okay.
Like those earrings.
Thank you. Good to see you, brother.
You too. You too. The family doing well?
Everybody's doing well. Yeah. So far, so good.
Okay, we are live and we are up. So I'll just add in Cleo when he comes in.
Okay. I just sent them a message too.
Okay, cool. So welcome everybody. We have a few people coming in, so we'll let a few more kind of get going.
Right. Is this streaming live to Facebook?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We're up and live. There's 7 people logged in on Facebook.
All right.
And about 40 or so on YouTube. So it's climbing.
Okay.
So I'm gonna let people climb in here a little bit, and get it going. See, we got Leroy in here.
All right.
In the chat. AB Media. OL Griffin, what's going on, people? Grinch, what's up? Letting people come in. Appreciate that, Youssef, for the support. So now this is the brainchild. This event is the brainchild of the brilliant Miss Zakiya. So if as we kind of wait for some people to come in, if you can tell us about just kind of how this came about a little bit and why, I think that would be appreciated.
Yeah, of course. So good to be in the company of you two good brothers. Been following and reading your work for some time now. And of course, like everybody else who's heard about Brother Ahmaud Arbery down in Brunswick, Georgia, again, just hit me, in a very deep place. The fact that it was literally took 3 months for these arrests to take place and that this brother was literally like murdered and no consequences whatsoever. I mean, and this wasn't the police. I think, to me, it harkens back to Trayvon, like these white vigilantes who feel like they have the power to just execute us at will and to police our blackness, our being, right? And so for me, I wanted to have a conversation that centers Black humanity, particularly for our Black men and boys who are very much overrepresented in police murders and these vigilante deaths. And also do some interrogation of our politics, I would say, within the nonprofit industrial complex and even within some liberal spaces that also pathologize Black men and boys, to me, that creates the environment for this kind of loss of life without consequence. So that's what sparked the idea. And I couldn't think of anybody better to have a conversation with than both of you.
Oh, absolutely. And after Tommy introduced me to you a few years ago, I learned very directly you cannot and should not say no to Zakiya for nothing. So you support her from the beginning, and everything will be smooth. I was gonna wait until the brother Cleo came in to do some.
He let me know. Yeah, he let me know that he's having some camera problems. So he did just send me a message. So he may be a little bit more tardy.
And if he can't get his camera, we can still get his voice in if need be. But just for the sake of at least starting off, let me introduce everybody who'll be here. So as you guys should know at this point, we got Ms. Zakiya Sankara-Jabar, National Director of Activism and Outreach for an Education Justice Organization, which is a new position, I understand. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And also co-founder of Racial Justice Now. We will soon have Dr. Cleo Menago. Is that how you pronounce the brother's name?
Yes, that's my understanding. Yes.
Okay. CEO, founder, AmASSI Center for Black Wellness and Culture, and Black Behavioral Health Strategist and Media Commentator. So hopefully we'll have him in soon. And I don't even have to introduce, even though I'm going to. Right? It's my honor to introduce the good brother Tommy J. Curry, Dr. Tommy J. Curry. personal chair in Africana philosophy and Black male studies at the University of Edinburgh, and author of an incredible number of publications, but a favorite, particularly on YouTube, is The Man Not. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
I am Dr. T. Hasan Johnson, Africana Studies Associate Professor at Fresno State, and I've been kind of honored with kind of hosting this a little bit and getting us going. So there's a couple of main events that I think kind of kicked this off, as Zakiya was just pointing out, and I thought maybe we could start with a little bit of an overview of where we are on both of the main cases. So as far as Arbery is concerned, Ahmaud Arbery, does anybody want to give us kind of a state of affairs of things at this moment?
I think they're bringing it to grand jury.
They've been arrested.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And we found out there was some blockage by the DA's office in terms
a white female DA. Yes.
Female DA. Right.
Important to mention that.
Make sure we mention that, because when we elect women, everything is supposed to be right.
That's what they told me in my classes. That's what the liberals tell me.
That's what the liberals tell you, right?
Yeah, that was the big drawback, right? Okay, so that's where we understand things are at this point. And for those who may not know, and I'm sure most of us do, we had a video of Ahmaud Arbery, who was merely jogging and was literally shot doing so by two white men. Okay, here we go. We got Dr. Menago here. Let me add him.
I just told him he could join without camera. Oh, there he is.
There we go. Can you hear us and see us okay, Doc?
I hear you and see you well. Pardon my delay here. My software don't like your software.
Understood. Well, I just introduced you, even though you weren't up yet. So we were just starting out with a bit of an overview. Somebody might have to watch their feedback. So if you don't have any earphones, you might want to.
Yeah, you need some earphones.
Is that me?
I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Give me a moment.
No problem.
No worries.
Just you can mute it until you get your earphones in. But so we were starting with a little bit of an overview, and we were talking about what actually took place with Ahmaud Arbery. So we're talking about Brunswick, Georgia, young black male going for a jog. He is, basically assassinated by two white men who argue, in retrospect, that he was some kind of threat. They thought he might have been committing robberies in the area, even though there have been articles that have come out to suggest that there had not been any robberies up to that point. And that's where we find ourselves with that particular case. The other case was Sean Reed. Anybody want to give us some understanding on what took place there?
Based on my understanding, and with that brother, is that he was on Facebook Live. He was being followed by the police, and he decided to hop out of the car and he ran. So the police pursued him, I believe shot between 10 to 15 rounds, and the police unknowingly, knowing that, the phone was still recording, literally laughed and said, "I think that's going to be a closed casket, buddy," or something. I'm paraphrasing, but literally laughed and said it would be a closed casket. So I think that's so indicative to what I prefaced this conversation about, just literally not just any kind of regard for human life, but literally laughing about it, like joking about it. For me, what it brought up was the pictures that we've seen in books about how white people would stand around while a black man was being hung from a tree, and they smiling in pictures, to me, that's indicative of that. Yeah.
Right. So we're talking about 21st century lynching.
Yes.
And if we could, let's see if we can get Dr. Curry to kick us off. What would you say is in terms of black male death? Where are we in 2020 in your assessment with this whole dynamic?
I mean, this has been a perennial problem. I wish I could say something different, but
yeah,
You know, when you look over the last 5 years, I remember when people started marching for Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, you know, the brothers that had been shot by the cops. And back then there were arguments about, you know, there wasn't any official data. Washington Post wasn't doing the live tracking at that point. And people were arguing, oh, this isn't that big of a problem. And now that we have live tracking of police killings in the United States, you see basically 280 or so to 300 black men being shot per year.
Right.
That doesn't seem to change very much. I haven't seen a large decrease or increase one way or the other. But when you look at that, you know, on top of the incarceration rates, on top of unemployment, on top of low life expectancy, it's hard not to believe that there's not I've said this before, there's not a genocidal agenda that occurs through gendercidal processes, meaning that in order to eliminate black people and make sure they're not a viable political and reproductive demographic in the United States, the killing of young black men and boys between the ages of 15 and 34 seems to be a routine practice in the United States. And I think that this was not something that was shocking anywhere in the early 19th century. There's lots of writings, there's lots of white sociologists like John Dollard, Pettigrew, etc., trying to suggest, I mean, even Monahan actually, suggesting to us that black men are targeted by systems of racism and white supremacy. What's happened to us in the last 40 years or so is that we've been very much blind to the fact that there's a very deliberate strategy to eliminate black men and boys from the nation. I remember reading, you know, an early article by James Stewart where he talked about institutional decimation, the deliberate removal of black men from American civil society. And because we haven't had people specifically working on that process, trying to figure out how and why black men are being removed, what are the processes, what are the kind of logics that allow this to appear normal, we see what we have before us today. The reality of the situation is that the broadcast and recording of police shooting black men, as well as white vigilantes killing black men and boys, has not arrested. There is no shame in being discovered to assassinate black males in this country. You know, that's not, of course, to erase the sisters, but I think we have such a disproportionate, right? You're talking about 290, 300 black men killed per year versus 15, 20, you know, sisters, if even that high. We have to start asking more specific questions. Why are black men being killed? Why are black boys entering the world?
I'm sorry. Wait. I'm sorry, Dr. Curry. We're still getting a lot of feedback, Dr. Menago. What we might have to do is mute you until you speak, but it still might give feedback when you talk unless we can get you on some earphones. But I apologize for interrupting, Dr. Curry.
No, it's not a problem. Not a problem.
Go ahead.
But given that situation, I think there should be a clarion call.
What we might have to do. Okay, one of us has got some more feedback. Okay, and to put some image to your words, let me just kind of pull up on the screen for those of you who can actually see it here. These are the numbers that come from the Washington Post for the last 3 years. And what did you say?
Yeah, this is their live tracking system. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then before that, the first 2 years in 2015 and 16 from the Guardian. So you can see, you know, people killed by the police in those years. Now, what's interesting about Washington Post is they actually make in the title, they frame it as those who've been shot. So there may even be some missing numbers in terms of that if people have been killed by other means, as we saw with, you know, Eric Garner. So just to kind of give some visual to what we're talking about, these are annual numbers by and large. So anywhere from 2 to 300 black men and 9 to roughly 20 black women, depending on the year. These are what some of the numbers show us about black death. Now, let me get to Dr. Menago. Am I pronouncing that correctly, brother?
Yes, you did. And can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
Oh,
okay.
Good.
Where would you say we are right now? You know, leading off from where Dr. Curry left off, just in terms of you know, black male death and state of affairs. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, there's all kinds of death. Clearly, there's blatant physical death, which leads to no more animation in the body. But I used to work in law enforcement, and Black men in particular are being maimed.
Yeah.
Black men in particular are being put in comatose states based on how bad the beating was. There's all types of things happening to Black men that don't make the press because it doesn't always end in a body. Also, these numbers are underreported. There's small towns, there's places where they don't do data well, where they don't have sophisticated systems or sophisticated concerns about their high body count. You might remember that the former Attorney General, Eric Holder, attempted to make sure that all systems, police and so-called law enforcement systems in the country, documented the gun killings. Not everybody's on board yet.
Right.
So these are underreported numbers.
Yes.
My concern, at the risk of getting on anybody's nerves, is that Black paralysis in the wake of white redundancy is what's concerning me. We've had this conversation 5 gazillion times about a brother being murdered for nothing. And now, because of the advent of cell phones and videotapes, we get to see it sometimes if we're lucky enough. Y'all might know that Trayvon almost didn't make it to national coverage.
Absolutely.
Same with Rodney King. It was happenstance way back then that we saw that. I would just want to reiterate that we have a major crisis that's worse than that our hearts are allowing us to comprehend, and that our question about Black worth and value is allowing us to comprehend. Because we should be outraged, but not just outraged and acting out. We should be actively involved in looking at policy, confronting Congress, confronting whoever the president is going to be, and make some policy demands regarding this whole thing. But Black people are my concern. White people are being redundantly white. They're doing what they do. They're acting on us because they feel, I call them, instead of white supremacy, I call them white inferiorists. Because my engagement with them has been proven that they feel challenged, they feel mediocre, they feel less than, they feel compelled and very, very amazed with us. And I think we make them feel insecure, and they resent that, so they try to stamp us out. I mean, to give you an example, that didn't lead to death, but I think, for example, when Barack Obama spoke to Congress for the first time and that white man couldn't help himself and called him a liar, he just couldn't sit there and let this Black man, who was a embodiment of the myth of white supremacy, continue. He just couldn't take it. And a lot of Black men and women, but particularly men, die because white people just can't take it. And that's been our experience since we've been here. Getting back to Black people, though, white people just being white. It's not natural. I'll just say with this. It's not natural for Black people to have the relatively passive response that we have.
It's not natural
To a young brother jogging, a young brother going to get some tea for his little brother. We know all the stories. A young brother, Michael Brown, who didn't want to walk across a little street, and it was called jaywalking. It was a little neighborhood. I went to the place where he was murdered. It's a small street that the white cop just wanted to control his body, and when he wouldn't let him control his body, he said, "Well, then you will not have a body." My concern is Black. I think we're in a white supremacy trauma trance. That's what I call it. We're in a trance. We're not fully present.
Right.
And because we're not fully present, we're in a state of paralysis, and we're just sitting around to some extent waiting for the next murder that we know about. Because there's murders we don't know about in small towns and large towns.
Right. And that's an important distinction, especially what you brought up earlier in terms of the role of smartphones and social media. I'll give credit, however, to Mamie Till, Emmett Till's mother, for actually, engaging media in a way we had not seen to advocate for, Black folk. I mean, she put her son right there in Jet Magazine and challenged the world with that image. So now we're in a time frame where anybody with a phone, which, like you said, was unprecedented. When you talk about Rodney King, that was damn near an accident that somebody caught that. But now we're in this era where this happens. And I want to direct this question to Zakiya because it has to do with this issue of an intervention that I think we're also kind of talking about, because in the last number of years, there's been a certain way that Black death has been handled, especially in the media. There's some articles that we've seen coming up by everything from VSB to whatever. there's a certain way Black deaths have been kind of handled as of late. You called for an intervention in talking about this conversation. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed is, I work in the nonprofit industry, and I've seen at different conferences, different events, there's this, I don't know how to say it, but there's almost a hustle to Black death, almost, right? Like there is this, hashtag. That's why this is called No More Damn Hashtags, is because we go from hashtag to hashtag to hashtag, but then I'm not seeing real push for actual policy interventions, right? For actual responses to this. I couldn't agree more with Brother Cleo, because I feel like it's normal for Black self-defense. Like I'm tired, right? I'm tired. So I'm familiar with the history of the Deacons of Defense. I'm familiar with Robert and Mabel Williams. And I'm just wondering, right, where are the pockets of that happening? Because I'm not seeing it, right? Where is the response from our community? I saw a sister on YouTube the other day, and she was like, where are all the Black gangs? Y'all need to be going down to Brunswick, Georgia. Because what is it that we have this paralysis that we're allowing these deaths really to go unchecked? And the intervention when it comes to, as far as liberal politics, is that what I'm concerned about is that I hear very pathological narratives about Black men and boys at conferences that to me creates the conditions, right,
Absolutely,
that allows them to be murdered without consequences. And the intervention is I want publications like Very Smart Brothers and others to be held accountable for really the defamatory writing that they write about Black men and boys, literally not backed up by any kind of empirical sociological data, which is why I love Brother Tommy so much, is because he like name names. He literally tells these people, you're quoting white racist sociologists, right, who are coming from a deficit perspective. And a lot of times I am under the belief that they don't even know that they're quoting white racist activists.
They've never been coming.
Could I respond to that real quick?
Sure.
We'll take you and then Dr. Curry.
Two things. Gangs, as they're called, are not designed to defend Black people. They're designed to kill each other.
Yeah.
And if you learn the genesis of how they came to be, there's a film that came out some time ago called Crips and Bloods Made in America. It's a brilliant depiction of, and I'm from that area, of how this came to be. And it's another misdirected reaction to intergenerational unresolved trauma and fear of the real enemy, if you will, and taking that on each other that we have not worked through, and these young kids. And there's more to it than that, but that's the bottom line. But there's something that Zakiya says I wanted to jump on, and it's leaving me. Hopefully it'll come back. I'm sorry, it left me because I went on that tangent about that, but it'll come back. I'm sorry.
No doubt.
Okay, Dr. Curry.
Well, I think. Well, look, we have to be very.
Oh, I got it now. I'm sorry.
Sure.
This is she mentioned Very Smart Brothers. Now, Very Smart Brothers, to my knowledge, have among them wounded Black men, homosexual and bisexual and same gender loving Black men who are mad at the Black community, who are getting their sense of self through the white paradigm, with the white supremacist paradigm called gay, who encourages them to fight against their people for being so-called homophobic. The gay construct has no relevance or interest in Black repair, Black historical context, cause and effect in terms of how white and racist it is and its negative impact on homosexual and bisexual Black people. That's not in their equation, though that's an extremely horrible problem. But what I wanted to raise was that part of that the attack on Black men is passive aggressive, dysfunctionally acted out resentment toward Black people for not accepting homosexual people. And the conversation has not been had in a rational way within the Black community to this day on a macro level. So the people are still acting out and doing these things that might be called a scholarly treatise and all kinds of stuff, which is really folks acting out their issues and acting out on Black people, and some of them literally refer to so-called straight or heterosexual men as being equivalent to
straight Black man, the
which is you're gonna call the most murder and attack population in the Western world the equivalent to the attacker? It's insane, but I get it. And in order for us to deflect that, Black people have to have some conversations about sexuality and gender demands and masculine and feminine expectations and demands, which we have not done as a people because we've been too self-conscious as a people and too wounded when it comes to the social and literal castration of Black men and the humiliation that has happened to us resulting from that, to go on and have that conversation, and we need to have it.
I agree. Really quickly, Brother Tommy, I want to add something. The other thing is I hosted a conversation last night with some former colleagues, and we watched COINTELPRO 101. And I actually see, I'm not discounting what Brother Cleo was saying. I think that's a valid critique. And I do think that on a macro level, you're right. We need to have that conversation as a community, but without white influence, which is why I appreciated the space that you held in Baltimore a few months ago, which was very helpful to me. However, I also see publications like Very Smart Brothers as a continuation, if you will, of counterinsurgency within the Black community or in COINTELPRO, because one of the tenets of COINTELPRO was to continue to sow dysfunction, to continue to sow division. And that's exactly all you see from that type of ilk all over Twitter and even in their writing. So to me, I think it's a both and. You cannot discount because these people are paid. The brothers that's running that, he's got book deals. He's flying all over the country. I mean, people love him, like especially white people, white liberals and Black liberals and other people. So I think that we can't discount the fact that this is very intentional.
It is intentional.
Dr. Curry?
Dr. Curry?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I would point out, though, that we've always had, radical queer brothers that have exposed this kind of relationship, right? One of the reasons that I'm a fan of Calvin Warren's work is because he points out the ways in which the gender question has been manipulated to facilitate Black death, right?
Yeah.
What we're discussing here, I think, is more closely aligned to how white supremacy utilizes certain kinds of misunderstandings and disagreements within the Black community, and then through the power of recognition, saying that you're the special Negro, you then become the prophet of Black people's problems. I think the same thing happened in the 1980s with Bell Hooks, which is why she could get so many book deals published on South End Press without citations. That's why I think that nobody's actually went through her work and questioned why she's utilizing subculture violence theory and insidiously racist theory. And here's the interesting piece about that is that Black studies grew up as a way to challenge subculture violence theory. The subculture violence theory says that Black people have a subculture, an American culture that doesn't share in civil values. They're angry, aggressive, they kill each other, they rape each other, right? And then Black studies said, no, this is environment. You put any group of people in the same circumstance, you see the same things. But when we talk about Black people, somehow Bell Hooks, the guy, Damon Young from Very Smart Brothers, are constantly traveling, selling Black male pathology to white liberals. And because he's a Black man to do it, I don't know his sexual orientation, but because he's a Black man doing it, I saw the interview he did with Jamel Hill, and he said, oh, well, that article is getting all the press. Of course, because it's stupid. It's not celebratory. It's that you can't, even when you're pushed a year or two later, and people saying, where are you getting this idea from? He's just like, you're acting like white people questioning my view of sexism. These kinds of tropes of shame are no longer sufficient. What we have to understand today is very simple. We spent the last 20 or 30 years dehumanizing Black men within gender studies. The national face of rape and criminality have been Black men and boys. The notion of the super predator that comes about in the 1990s is no different than the contraculture or the subculture theory that's out in the 1970s and 80s. This stuff is cited by white feminists. This is being taught in classes. People like Susan Brown Miller is explaining Black masculinity as the tendency to rape and kill in her book against rape. And this is being picked up by people like Bell Hooks. This is being picked up by people like Kimberly Crenshaw under the guise of second assault and rape activism, etc. So we have a very real problem. while we can admit that there's a conversation to be had about gender and sexual equality and sexual orientation in the Black community that no one, I think, can honestly dismiss, the utilization of these ideas have been very much bought into a white liberal power structure. Yes. And the effect of that is to sow disdain between Black people to never come up with a radical politics. We're absolutely complacent when it comes to the death of Black men and boys. And the reason that we are complacent is because we've been socialized to accept their dehumanization. If a white person gets shot in the street, we feel more outraged at the loss of their life than we do a Black boy or a Black man just running minding his business that belongs to our own group. And this is the problem. Like the rhetoric that we have never matches up to the activism because the rhetoric we have has deprogrammed us from actually acting. And I don't think anybody can actually sit here and say that, man, we've been studying this stuff since 2014, 2013, 2014. We've had empirical data about the disproportionate numbers of killings, right? Though incomplete it must be. And there's been no revolt. In fact, you had Black Lives Matter come in and de-radicalize working class Black people even farther. And did what? The people who wanted violence, you said that these were the barbaric and uncivil people. And the people who questioned the leadership because it wasn't radical enough, they become homophobic. And what do white people do? They don't care about whether or not these people are actually representing the interests of Black people. They don't care if Black men and women see themselves in that leadership. They reward it. They give it prizes, Nobels, etc. So white people say, we think this is a good movement, even though it has a decreased deaths. I've just never seen a movement so unaccountable in my life. Maybe it's because I'm still young, but I've never seen a political movement say that our job is to actually decrease police violence, police brutality, and then don't do that at all and still be rewarded as a success. I mean, it's mind-boggling the types of things Black people accept. But as we know, the minute that you start Black people talking about self-defense, armed resistance, etc., as I did back in, I guess, 2012 or so now, that comes with threats to your job, threats to your livelihood, etc. So Black people have been put in a position, especially Black men, that if you talk about your constitutional rights because of the failure of the rule of law, your job and your life, your livelihood and character are under assault. And I'm frustrated. I think people who see me on Facebook for the last few days can see how frustrated I am because you see all these Black academics and the minute that COVID-19 happens, everybody's a specialist. Everybody has an opinion on COVID-19. People who study Dewey, people have no idea about public health or epidemiology, have an opinion about this pandemic and what it's going to do to Black people in the world at large. A Black man gets killed, a Black boy gets killed, and basically there's radio silence except for people that says this is an outrage. No analysis, just the same old trope. They killed a Black boy. It's so unfair. But these departments, and it upset because some of the people that I see sharing anti-Black misandric pieces on Black men and boys that hold the view that Black men and boys are deviant, that censor Black male studies and any attempt for Black men to express their frustration, anger, and offer analysis of this, they censor that stuff. They participate in that censoring of that work. And the reason that work is important, right? The reason that work is important is because it could spark somebody in the policy realm to say, this is a real problem, let's do something. But we don't even have an academic channel that's trying to understand the sexual vulnerability of Black men to police killings and being killed by white vigilantes. And that's the other piece. This is white people. These are white people in the public deciding that they have been deputized by white supremacy to take out Black people. And I think about the work of A.J. William Myers here, where he's talking about how in a white supremacist society, white people, white citizens belong to the communion to take out Black people. And I don't think Black people wrap their head around it. I think Afro-pessimism is trying to push people that way, right? In the sense that Black people are not human and will never be human. But I guess I'm a social historical thinker, but we've been here before. This is why we had armed resistance from the 1940s to 1960s, right? And now that we have Black men dying, nobody wants to take up arms. I see so many people sharing hashtags.
I do.
Oh, absolutely. Well, present company excluded. But I saw one of the posts from one of the crunk feminist people that said something to the effect that Black people are dying, Black men are dying, but Black men voted for Donald Trump. It's it's obviously false, right? Because it's a silly poll with a 90% difference. But beyond that, it represents what we're talking about. This
it's not
need to
completely
look at
false,
Black
though.
men as an always but situation, a proposition. Black men are always dying, but they're killers and rapists of women, but they're dangerous, but X, Y, and Z. So within the phrasing of every kind of acclamation or affirmation of Black male life, there contains within it its negation. And that's what I think we have to deal with. It's not just the intellectual piece, but it's the way we're thinking about Black men. Because there's some Black people out here that think that white vigilantes are doing a service by eliminating young Black men and boys from American society. And that's why you have this condition. There's so much violence imposed on Black people. This is why I say this is genocidal level threats. And nobody seems to be moved by it because we just don't like straight Black men. Right. And until we actually do something about this, and I like the idea of holding people accountable, but until we actually do something about this, start writing these people, start a backlash against people like VSB who have no citations, have no basis for the defamation of Black men and boys, white liberals are going to continue to reward them. The Black community has to step out on this.
Hold up, a little station information, house cleaning business. If you can't access it on Facebook, this is going live on YouTube. Just search Dr. T. Hasan Johnson. It should be public on Facebook, but if you have any technical issues, you can go there. There are plenty of people supporting the show. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to catch everybody, but I wanted to say thank you outright. We have a limited amount of time for today, so I'm going to let the conversation go. But I do want to thank everybody who is sending in support to continue doing so. And I wanted to quickly point out, kind of piggybacking on what Dr. Curry was talking about, the bait and switch that we've been seeing this last number of years when it comes to Black male deaths has been really, jarring and traumatic in and of itself. Because what's been happening is, Black men have been used as bait. And then by the time people join, send in money, so on and so forth, to support organizations, all of a sudden the issue switches to a whole nother platform, whether it has to do with strictly LGBT, whether it has to do with feminism, and somehow Black men aren't relevant. And I've sat in meetings with some of these organizations where they have marched Black men out the room. They've told Black men, you can't take a position of leadership in this organization, meaning your deaths are okay for us to use, but we really don't want to talk about it, especially as it pertains to straight Black men. And I think if you look at some of the kinds of statements that activist Darren Seal was making a number of years ago after the death of Michael Brown, he talked very explicitly about the way you had a cadre of people come into Ferguson who were not native, right, who actually were a little more savvy on Twitter and whatnot, and ended up appropriating support that would have gone to grassroots programs and organizations, including the organization started by Michael Brown's father. But somehow all of those resources got usurped, and then those very people left Ferguson when it was no longer important and wasn't in the news. So you have this kind of baiting and switching that takes place that implicates class. It implicates a particular cadre of the educated, quote unquote, Black elite who can come in and take these issues on using technology that maybe sometimes grassroots people aren't as up on, and then leave with those resources, change the narrative, and make the issue about something else entirely. So, and when Black men try to articulate that, and engage it, they're dismissed. They're told that their presence is not welcome, their narratives and reflections aren't narrative, which is why I think the dragging that Very Smart Brothers recently got on Twitter was very important, because it was a statement by everyday people across, I would argue across class, particularly Black men, who are saying, no, you're not going to come in and mislabel us, denigrate us in these articles where you're calling Black men the white men of America. This is ridiculous. And I repeated that on my blog as well. But you're not going to come in and dismiss Black men for profit, and then when it's convenient, talk about how tragic it is that we're killing, and then claim that if we don't allow it to happen, we can't grasp nuance. No, that's not the issue at all. We can't grasp hypocrisy. We can't grasp greed and exploitation in the interest of carrying out an agenda that has nothing to do with acknowledging what exactly Black people, and particularly Black men, are grappling with on the ground, especially if you're going to sweep it under the rug and act like it doesn't happen when it's not convenient to you gaining a profit.
That's right.
These brothers are looking for contracts, man. I think one of the things we have to recognize very, very clearly is that Black people in the United States Academy, in colleges, universities, and people who are on the speaking tour don't really have Black people at heart. I haven't seen many of them that tell the truth about racism. They don't tell the truth about violence in our own homes. And as I've said before, that's been my frustration. Like, I'm interested in why we hurt each other. And because these people's primary audience is white people, they can frame conversations about Black boys being abused and turning into abusers as adults as somehow anti-woman, right? These liberal agendas constrain and censor what we can talk about. So you're not going to get a VSB or anybody with those speaker bureaus to come out and have a real conversation based in data, based in history about what's going on. I think that when the alt-right took over, it became very, very clear that the predominant view that we were dealing with was about whether or not the white population will remain in control, right? Would they remain in control of the United States? And until we get our hand on that, until we get our hand around concepts like demography and why managing populations in the United States has not been very different than what we've seen in other countries or in other colonies, and managing populations in that way through violence, intimidation, and indoctrination, we're not going to understand why our people in the 21st century have not made the same climb as other so-called ethnic minorities compared to our racial and racist position in the United States.
I really think that at some point, and I'm willing to be involved in this if anyone agrees, we really need to have a conversation that's going to be mostly about solutions to this issue. Mm-hmm. I get bored while being, dealing with a sense of perpetual grief, but bored with the conversation of what white people do and what white accommodationist Black people do. Because I've been hearing about that and witnessing that and writing about that and critiquing that and deflecting and challenging that for decades. And I always felt alone. When I heard about Dr. Curry, I almost fainted. I was amazed. I'm serious. I'm honored to be in the same kind of in the same space technologically as this brother, because his work, his mind, his theories, his facts, his concepts, his research, his perception is key to the transformative possibilities there in terms of strategies in this country. And we have to start having meetings that start off with strategic ways to change what we just got finished talking about, which is old news.
Yeah.
This is old news. But let me relax. I'm trying to be professional and let me stay focused. But seriously, the conversation needs to start off with a summary of the redundancy of white evil and Black psychosis as seduced by white evil. And then we look at how we can structurally, systemically, academically, on a community level, de-entrance our people and wake them up. Because I'm telling you from experience that most Black people, including the most messed up Black people, aren't volunteering to be messed up. Oh, they are living inside of a worldview that is a bubble of anti-Blackness, which is bolstered by the N-word, but that is not ever put up for review. And then, as Curry just mentioned, all this insanity is rewarded. And then people get TV shows, and then they look like they're doing well based on a capitalist perspective of what doing well looks like. And then everybody gets seduced into the religion of anti-Blackness, and you could get in trouble for being pro-Black. Matter of fact, as we all know, we're psychotically conditioned to think that the opposite of pro-Black is anti-white, when in fact it's anti-Black, the opposite of pro-Black. But I've done many live surveys and written surveys with Black people and ask them what do they think of when they think of pro-Black. And the majority of them go, they're concerned about, they're concerned about white people. Their feelings are going to be hurt. Don't do that. Don't be militant. Don't do that. Then when I stay rational and I say, don't do what? When I say,
it's real.
But the bottom line, because I can talk forever, is that from my research experience and interviews and work, we are not really interested in being crazy. It is a norm to be crazy. and we're not given the license or the language. For example, working in nonprofit social services systems, there is no paradigm even existing that gets you to consider the humanity of Black males. It ain't even part of the thought process. It's not part of the conscious or the unconscious, because people are perpetually living in a society, in a worldview. I'm talking about Black people. I ain't talking about white people. I'll make that clear. Yeah. None of this is about white people. They're redundantly doing what they do. I'm talking about how Black people think and how our work needs to be about finding respectful, effective ways to get Black people to come out of the white supremacy trauma trance. Because until we do that, this is just talking. We're gonna wait for Dante to be murdered while he's jogging, and then come together again and talk about the pathologies that come out of living in this society for 500 years or whatever. We gotta start at another place, at solutions. And there are solutions. I've been involved myself in work that has resulted in behavior change. I have a model called CTCA, which stands for Critical Thinking and Culture Affirmation. Without going into all the details, what the model does is it does trance breaking triggering. It wakes Black people up by getting them to self-evaluate and look at how they came to be, where they were, you came from. They learn how to decode white supremacy in media all over the place, because it's all over the place. And in many cases, they're blown away by not now seeing what they did not see, which was already in front of them the whole time. And then once we get them triggered into an awakening, then we do the critical thinking work, because now they're prepared to actually go deep and do some work around unlearning internalized white supremacy. If you give good advice to somebody in a trance, which is most of us, it only stays there like the dollar bill, a few minutes, and then it's gone. We got to do the trance breaking work. And I'm willing to talk about that and work with whoever around that, but we're in a trance. We are in a hostile environment that we've been told to let white Jesus handle, which is like letting the, a monster. But that's what, and look, we up in the church, you know that.
Yeah.
Knee deep up in the church. We're not knee deep in the streets fighting against our inhumane treatment, but we up in the church praying to a white Jesus. That's relevant to the trance that we're in. And that's relevant to us not seeing the dead, murdered body of a Black male as something to be horrified about that we should intervene on.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
he's in a better place.
No, So one of the things that I've noticed about that too, especially working again like in the nonprofit space as an organizer and as an activist, is I have oftentimes questioned why we don't use the work of Black thinkers like Dr. Bobby Wright, why we don't use the work of Black thinkers like Dr. Wade Nobles and all of those folks who are at the Association of Black Psychologists, because for me, I have found that their work has been critical in how I've unlearned a lot of internalized things that is just baked into everything, right? How I've unlearned how white supremacy really impacts everything, or white domination impacts every institution of people activity. And I learned that really at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a shell game. Like you said, Dr. Hasan, like the bait and switch. I have also witnessed, and this was an organization that was formed several years ago that was specifically supposed to focus on young Black men and boys, but also other boys of color. And the bait and switch happened almost immediately when the funding came through. Everybody else came to the table. Oh no, we have to talk about X, Y, and Z issue. This can't just be about Black men and boys or boys of color, because that's oppressive. And I'm like, what? Like, you got the money because it was supposed to be for, police, harm to boys and men of color. It was supposed to be for disproportionate suspensions and expulsions that we know impact boys and men of color. It was supposed to be for all these things. And then the bait and switch, as soon as the money came through to actually work on those issues, the bait and switch happened. And so I'm sitting at a lot of these tables and I'm advocating. I'm like, no, okay, so you have a table over there. If you want to work on X, Y, and Z issue, I'm going to need you to go over to that table and work on it, because right here, this is what we're doing. Like, there's okay, right, to have Black only spaces. It's okay to have Black women only spaces. Nobody, fights against that. But why is it never okay to have a Black male?
Zakiya,
Right.
Zakiya, I was asked to be on a advisory board for a men's health project in Atlanta. And it was, and mind you, everybody involved in this project was a Black male. And they had gotten funding from some federal funding source to deal with health disparities for Black men. And I was flown to Atlanta to review this board. I get there, and the project is called Men of Color Health Project. And so I asked very calmly, I try to be respectful, I said, what color? And when I said what color, these Black people, grown Black people, froze. And I said, what color? Because the data that was used to get this grant, which I read, said Black. It didn't say nothing about no colors. It said Black.
That's right.
So I said, what color? And they were stuttering and becoming catatonic. And I'm like, and I stayed calm because I've been through this before. I know how we are afraid to be Black, even in the presence of Black people. Mm-hmm. So I said, why is there silence? Why is there concern and anxiety? Then one person finally said it. He said, we don't want to offend the funder.
Wow.
I said, wait a minute, wait. The money was assigned to you based on Black health disparities that you documented and put in the grant, the proposal to get the money, but you're calling it people of color. Did they tell you to call it people of color?
Right.
They had not. They didn't tell them these are Black people who are in the white supremacy trauma trance. But they did not tell them to call it that. But they were so concerned about not offending white people that they hid Blackness under people of color for men. I didn't get on that advisory board.
It's more than just white people, because what I've noticed is that we will go out of our way to advocate for everyone amidst other groups, and they have no reservations about representing their own politics unapologetically. Whether it has to do with gender, sexuality, different racial groups, other groups will advocate for their policies, their interests, and we have a problem engaging that. And this is why I support Dr. Curry, and what Zakiya is doing is applying the same thing. I think, maybe she can correct me if I'm wrong, but applying a similar platform in terms of activism, but doing it in a data-driven framework. We start with where the data takes us, not where the ideology begins, not what we feel like doing, not what some people like. No, we start with the data. So if I tell you that 75% of Black boys in California are illiterate, and we set up a program and get funding to support that, we're not going to switch the program later because it makes other people feel good or some people don't like it. Wait a minute. No, the data tells us where to start. You know what I mean? And I think part of the importance of that movement was that wasn't something that, anybody, I won't say anybody, that wasn't something that was expected to come, particularly from Black males in academia. And it definitely wasn't something anybody thought would get published. Because I had a chance to read, The Man Not when it was in Word format, and I was like, "You get this mess published, I didn't want to say nothing. He sent me the book, and he's like, hey, "What you think?" I said, "It's dope." But I didn't want to say, "I don't know if you're gonna get it published." Next thing I know, published, and I'm like, "This is beautiful," because in many instances, the institutions, and they still are present, that exclude those kinds of works, don't allow them to get to the fore. So when you talk, Zakiya, about the Bobby Wrights, those brothers and sisters from from several decades ago who were the institutions that bar those type of publications are still going on. There are many works that have never got out the gate because people can't get them published. You know what I mean? Yeah. So the kinds of the other Tommy Currys out there, and I add myself to that list, it's hard to get that information out because, again, folks are so worried about making others uncomfortable, even within the Black intelligentsia. And many of us who are in the academy are so worried about being blackballed and being fired that we kowtow to whatever is popular and just go with that. Right.
Yeah. Which is why I love you and Dr. Curry so much, is because I have no patience for Black people who are kowtowing. I mean, I get it, right? You're worried about your job, but I feel like Black people have always had to be creative when it came to this freedom.
Absolutely. But kowtowing is often a symptom of what their parents told them. Mm-hmm. That's why I keep saying we got to go back to looking at the root the infection and the interruption of Black culture that leads to these disruptive and dysfunctional norms. Because when I just told the story I just told you, it wasn't about what the white folks was doing. It's about the Black people who were taking care of the white people who weren't even in the room.
Oh, absolutely. But we
and,
know,
and we need to evict that white boy.
Yeah.
You know, and we need to talk about that the white boy is there, admit it, and do some work on eviction. Because we talk and we have some brilliant people in our midst and in our community and in our culture, but most of us are whitewashed. Most of us, I would say the majority of us are whitewashed. And we unconsciously or consciously sabotage great opportunities. Because when you talk about Dr. Curry's book not getting in place, there's some Black people who are keeping that book from not getting in place.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not, and instead of just being mad at Black people for being dysfunctional, we have to come up with a mechanism in which to do some awakening work. Because I think people want to be awake in their unconscious mind, and we have to tap into that.
I'm doing that on the activism side for sure. Go ahead, Tommy.
Well, no, I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm incredibly humbled by the stories, but I mean, I'll be very honest with you. I don't want to sidetrack too much, but I didn't think the book was going to get published either. Wow. So the book got 2 perfect reviews, and there were still members of the board who did not want to publish it. I remember one of the comments from someone on the Temple board was something like it should be a pamphlet. And I say that because the message about Black men and boys humanity is not something that seems to be compatible with the United States.
Right.
You know, I got a lot of different opportunities and I got a lot of obstacles thrown in my way being in the United States, trying to defend the humanity of Black men and boys. It's really easy to call a Black man a monster, you know, when he's trying to point out what's going wrong in our communities. It's even harder when you're trying to say, look, let's look at the Black family. Let's look at Black neighborhoods. Let's look at what's being reproduced as an inferiority complex that's causing violence. You know, it's very, very easy for Black people, not just white people, for Black people to take that message and make it into some kind of caricature of Black power politics, etc. And that's my way of saying that. I mean, since I've been over here in Europe, I've been much more skeptical that I think the black academics are just, I don't think there's much hope in that class. But I've been skeptical because I don't know if America is a place that could accept or I don't know what, unless it becomes violent and everything collapses, I don't know what else could fix America. Because every reform that people have hope for is paid for in the blood of Black people, disproportionately Black men and boys. That's every right. Single movement, from slavery when Black men are fighting the wars to civil rights when Black men are being assassinated, right? You name a movement, Black men and boys are in the front line dying for it. And then 2 or 3 generations, those very same men that laid down their lives for the race become monsters. Yeah, because what we are right now is in an indoctrination that tells us that you're a good Negro, that you're smart, that you're critical, that you're cutting edge. If you tell the rest of the world that every Black man that ever tried to achieve freedom was in fact only trying to pursue the interests of his penis. Mm-hmm. There's no evidence. There's no writing. There's not even writings of Black men saying they want to dominate Black women. It's just interpretation. And then you see the same group be killed today. And then people are like, well, what are we going to do? Well, you can't even have the conversation.
Right.
Because when you have the conversation, people knock you off for jobs. You don't get certain things funded. Right. There is no political or critical education that could go from the academy to the masses, which is exactly what was happening in the 1960s. Right.
Then why don't we not start at the academy then?
I mean, I'm trying to.
Why we got to start someplace else?
I mean, we can start in the neighborhood, but then the question is the access to resources.
But I think we're also seeing ideas that have trickled down into the community, because you don't have to start in the academy, but the ideas have trickled down, particularly through popular media. So for example, to even make the statement to center Black boys, what I'll find is even in, grassroots discourses in the community, the question of why are we centering Black boys will still come up. Why? Because the centering in and of itself has been, the centering has been a product of this idea that centering boys is inherently sexist act and oppressive. And I have heard that language coming from outside of the academy because we've had 40 years of media productions that have taken those ideas and put them out into the public into popular consumption. So those ideas are outside of the academy, and there's actually an echo chamber at this point between the we can talk about the nonprofit sector, we can talk about the academy itself, where you can have these ideas without resource, without, I should say, citation, backed by popular belief that the inherent gesture of looking at boys and men and speaking from that position is inherently a bad thing. So there's a reconciling with Black anger that needs to happen even within the Black community. And there is a reconciling on racial and gender lines that needs to happen within the Black community. And both things can often be unwelcome just at the presentation of them, which again, for me, reinforces the idea of going back and starting with, what does the data tell us? So right now, we're in the midst of a pandemic. And the question of who's dying is not something, you know, as many people need to have as I think needs. I'm not hearing it to the degree I need to. And when I started hearing about Black male deaths, the conversation I started seeing in think pieces and articles wasn't about Black male deaths. It was about who theoretically, in regard to intersectionality, is likely to die more. So you had the data showing us who was dying, and then you had presentations of think pieces that were saying who should die. And that's where the funding was. That's where I saw the conversations on the largest Black platforms, but not actually who was dying. So if we don't start with the data and we start with ideology, or we start with media-based beliefs, it's going to go astray, and it's harder to have those conversations.
But along with the data, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Along with the data, we need strategies, because
Absolutely.
we already have data on Black men and heart disease, Black men and stress, a growing problem with suicide. We can go on with Black people being in the red when it comes to particular health challenges for decades now. And we have the data, even when it comes to something like HIV and AIDS, for example, where Black men still make up the majority of people who are dying from it, or who get sick from it, or who are being infected. And we have the data, and the needle hasn't moved in terms of being successfully the successful development of effective interventions to address those issues. So data is helpful. It definitely helps with grants and things like that, and it allegedly gives you a place of fact as a baseline, but you still need a strategy.
But I would argue we don't start from that. The data is there, but that doesn't mean that that's where we start. And I agree with you that we need strategy, but if you have strategy that's based on inaccuracy, the strategy is going to address what isn't the focal point.
Well, I agree. That's why I said that's why I think I started my comment off that we need to look at having both. Because I don't see
have to look
both.
at the retaliation.
I don't see both happening. I see one or the other. Like I wrote something, I forgot how long ago it was, about the COVID-19 and the push among some of the members of Congress. And we got to get the data. We got to get the data on African Americans. I'm like, then what? What you gonna do? Because you didn't do nothing about the other data that we already have relevant to Black people.
Right, and that's not an issue of data. If you're talking about people that aren't trying to do the work to improve communities, they're not going to do it with or without the data. But if you don't start with it, it just goes astray. But Dr. Curry, you said something a moment ago that I couldn't hear, and then maybe Zakiya, if we can, isolate both of you so we can hear you out.
Go ahead, Tommy. Oh, is he frozen?
I think he's. I didn't know if he was frozen or if he was pissed. You were frozen.
No. Can y'all hear me?
I think he's freezing a little bit.
Can y'all hear me now?
We can hear you, but the image is frozen.
You're the Teddy Riley of this damn show right now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I agree, but we got to think about.
Oh man, we lost Tommy. He'll be back.
So he'll come back in. Zakiya, you were about to say something a moment ago.
I wanted to go back to what Tommy said in terms of the United States and how we're not serious. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. I didn't know if you could hear me or not. I just want to say, look, I completely agree. But we have to think about the retaliation that Black people get for talking about Black people.
Yeah.
I guess again, and this is for me in my last 8 months here. You're much more open to organizing, creating think tanks to have a kind of trickle-down effect of how people learn from certain kind of products. I don't know if we can re-socialize a whole group of colonized people in the United States. We have so many things working against us. You have the immediate needs of poverty and violence. You have black celebrity intellectuals saying, don't listen to these groups of scholars that are doing this work. You have white liberals incentivizing and paying people to take certain kind of democratic platforms and stances that are against their own interests. Problem. One of the reasons I'm so dedicated to starting a center in Europe is because it's a place where people can see that there's less oppression. Europe is not a miracle land, but it's a space where white people are not directing how black people fundamentally understand themselves in various contexts. That's the kind of thing that I don't know is available in the United States right now.
Okay.
But Dr. Curry, you got to create an annex, brother.
Try and form collective.
We losing you, Dr. Curry. Your internet is
ask ourselves very real quick.
Yeah, Dr.
He
Curry.
said-
I was
An annex.
Yeah,
I said, no, brother. You can't just be up in Europe. We need your tentacles in the United States as well. So get your nurture. Get your nurture.
Oh, absolutely.
He's in Europe for a reason, right? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm not going to speak for the brother, but I think, he had a very hard time in the American Academy.
Yeah, I know.
Extremely hard time. People are threatening his life, his family's life, his wife and 2 daughters. That's a lot. And then the other thing is he was being punished for trying to create a similar center here in the United States. You literally had black liberals and white liberals going against our brother. You know what I mean?
I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. I'm just saying that's why I use the term tentacles. I talk in very deliberate ways.
No, okay.
And I understand him going someplace where he can be safer, think, be affirmed, build, and not have so much interruption and BS.
But I think his tentacles are here. This is an example. This forum right here is an example. His social media is an example, and he's still in touch with many of us as activists and scholars here in the United States. Yeah, Tommy, my brother.
Yeah, I'm not abandoning it. Can y'all hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, talk about me like I'm not in the room.
Because you were not in the room.
You were for a minute.
Listen.
Teddy,
I'm very much committed to our people in the United States, right? I did not accept the position in Scotland as really a retreat. I mean, I came into the academy assuming that there would be violence to black people like me, because from the South, there's violence towards black people generally. That wasn't new. But in terms of effectiveness, right? I mean, we spent our whole careers, and this is what you're saying, sir. We spent our whole careers complaining about white people as if the act of criticism is going to change them. I don't believe that. I think Derek Bell and Richard Delgado and Kenneth Nunn, all people who are dear friends to me, are absolutely correct.
Yes.
And in that world where I saw that they're correct, because if you want to go up in the academy, you have to perform. You have to constantly show them that you're a good Negro. I have to constantly show them the fact that I've outpublished everybody in my generation and won more awards than people in their whole career, that somehow you can trust me. I'm safe. I'm not gonna upset you, boss. Mr. Charlie, you and Miss Ann will be right okay with me in the department.
That's right.
I communicate that to them. And I'm unwilling to do that. I am fundamentally unwilling to do that. So that means that I had to think a little bit differently about what kind of moves could I make that would actually have a lasting institutional effect. And by no means am I up here professing that, I figured it all out and we're going to be saved. But the issue is that we don't even have institutional or organized spaces that are allowed to be created in the United States. Because the minute that we get something together, when that person dies, it's all gone. The minute that we start some kind of push, the person dies or they're attacked. Or if a black man says, look, I disagree with what these liberal white feminists are doing, and you character, etc. And black people don't come in. And this is the thing that pisses me off, is that black people have a choice. Black people can say, we know what this is. We're going to hold on this brother or sister. But that's not what we do. So we have to, if we're going to stay in the United States and think about how to do this, we're going to have to figure out something that doesn't just appeal to the kind of organizational techniques that we've used in the past. And I think that that's a heavy burden. That's a heavy burden to kind of think yourself out of a situation, because you saw what they did to Darren Seals. And this is what pisses me off. Every time black people create something, you kill them, right? Like this is when we looked at Ferguson, you're seeing the systematic assassination of grassroots black men and women who are being put in the spotlight because their communities decided that these are the people we want to lead us. And what do these black liberals do? As Donna Ford says, these Negro pigs, right? They blast them in social media. Oh yeah, Donna don't play. But you know, they blast them in social media. They badmouth them to white liberals, right? And then all the funding went towards the people who had semi positions in the academy or within the nonprofit or the nonprofit sector, right? Like this is what we're fighting. So we have to be very clear about what we're identifying as the enemy, and we have to respond to that. What I think is happening, we have a lot of these conversations about criticism, but nobody wants to define an enemy, right? And I think that's really what upset people about me being in the United States. I'm very clear: white feminists, black liberals, etc. If you're not coming, even if you're a liberal, if you're not coming with an actual agenda, right, and you're not helping black people, but you're still getting jobs and grants as if you are, these people need to be held accountable. That's not a popular idea in the U.S. university. So if we're gonna talk seriously about strategy, then we have to look at the venues that are going to accept us. We have to start thinking about alternate funding sources, and we have to start thinking about a propaganda string. We don't do a very good job. We have YouTube and things of that sort, but we don't have a focal publication that's going to be dedicated to black men and black women of all spectrum, straight, gay, etc. We don't talk about black Muslims. Like, if we're going to do this, we have to actually have a diasporic sensibility that's getting all black people on board despite our differences. But what I see right now is we moralize everybody. So this person's not a liberal, this person's not a feminist, this person's not intersectional. So suddenly our whole group is warring with each other, and white people are walking around laughing at us. Because while these white feminists are saying that men are oppressive, they keep having white babies. They'll tell a black man he has to be married because he's a rapist and his dick's a weapon, but they won't put down a white dick. They'll keep having babies with these people and benefiting from the resources and the regeneration of patriarchy. And they tell our people, well, you got to be careful of patriarchy. You got to be careful of homophobia. You got to be careful of classism with their whole institutions. The reason that these white feminists are throughout the academy is because they don't care about that stuff. It's a fundamental program of miseducation. And then that makes it down to the activist circles. And it's these activists that come into the nonprofit sector, and you have the reproduction of a kind of poisonous ideology that says that the people that are being fundamentally exterminated, removed from society, are the people that are worth the least amount of concern. Mm-hmm. So this is a war. This is a flat-out war.
No, it's a flat-out war. Thank you for describing it. And I want to just interject really quickly when it comes to the activist side, is because, I've lived that. When I've had to really have some courage and stand up in these spaces. My organization has not gotten funding because of that. Mm-hmm. I've personally not gotten fellowships that I was highly qualified for. So it's real. The same kinds of, repercussions that you all face in the academy as activists, we face in the activist field. And it's very much married together. I didn't realize how much the academy was married to, I would call, professional activism and funding activism. It's very much married. Mm-hmm. And you have these academics sometimes who are also activists who literally pathologize those in the Black community who don't identify as feminists. I do not identify as a feminist. I identify as an Africana womanist from an African-centered perspective. I see myself and my life as an extension of that of the Black men in my life. Mm-hmm. And I don't do this bifurcation of, Black men over here and it's all about Black women. And I was a little taken aback too, just, recently during this presidential primary, is that there's all kinds of agendas for Black women. And my whole thing is okay, I love that, but I'm also not separated from my Black ass husband. I'm not separated from my Black son. You know what I'm saying? So where's the agenda for them? Right? And some will argue, well, if it benefits you, it'll benefit them. And likewise, if it benefits Black men, it should benefit Black women. Mm-hmm. And that's
they're lost causes. They're lost causes. And that's the thing. It wouldn't, I try to be as nuanced as possible with Black feminism and Black feminists. Nobody say that if somebody's a Black feminist and they're helping Black people, that's a problem. Nobody's rejecting Black feminism for that reason. But over large, that's not what's happening. You see very pathological stories coming out that are demonizing, and it's not just demonizing Black men, it's demonizing poor Black women. They don't care about these Black women's struggles. I've never met a Black feminist in my field that talks about domestic violence that actually studies or knows domestic violence victims besides for shelter work. They're not in communities. They don't see the effect it has on their children. They're not interested in families. They'll go to a shelter where it's kind of already selected for them and then see, I work in the shelter, but you don't see what's happening in the community. You don't see the communities these people are coming from, so it's a blindness that the ideology privileges, that you can be separate from your people. And then there are certain individuals that buy into that and then lecture everybody else about why the Black community is so backwards and it's so dangerous and every little Black boy is really a Black rapist. And we're not, and the thing is, we're not even challenging that. That's what upsets me. We're not even challenging that. And this isn't complicated academic shit. We're saying at the very base level, you are not you're dehumanizing these people. And we don't have a program or protocol that addresses the fact that you've internalized this and you're going out and professing it is true. So,
Dr. Curry,
yes, sir.
Announcement: your people are in a trance. Your people are in a deep white supremacy trauma trance, and they are not making decisions. They are acting out what the messaging that is in the culture, right. And they're not doing these things on purpose. When I do trans breaking work with Black people all the time, and they're shocked by their own behavior when they realize what they're doing. For example, this is only the one that comes to mind because I don't want to talk too much. But the film "This Is Us." You know about this film, right? The show. It's very, very popular. People really love that show, and one of the reasons I'm talking about Black people. I want to be clear. I ain't talking about nobody but Black people. And they talk about how wonderful it is, and there's a Black couple that's featured, a Black husband and a Black wife. And then I remind them, that Black husband was created by white people. Mm-hmm. You know that Black husband was saved from Black parents by a white savior, who the father had HIV and was dying, and the mother straight up died from drug overdose. You know that, right? Mm. And you know that it's all fiction. First of all, because they treat this stuff, they get tickets from the police speeding home to get home on time to watch this fiction that's in their heart and soul like a religion. And some of them are running to home to watch the Black couple that they're in love with, that their subconscious is teaching them to be anti-Black because of the anti-Black implications, because he's so wonderful because he has white parents. My point to you in telling you that story is that they have forgotten about that on a conscious basis. They didn't forget about that on an unconscious basis. The unconscious basis remember this stuff, and it's the unconscious basis that acts out the anti-Black implications that results, whether it's on the academic level, the white-collar level, the working class, poor and homeless level, these behaviors that we're talking about where we keep on sabotaging ourselves. Yeah. We don't realize we're doing these things. So that's why I think that we need to talk about, along with data, along with any other strategies, teaching Black people to come out of the white supremacy trauma trance and stop acculturating it and pass it on generation after generation. But we don't do that.
To come out of they're being paid highly paid to be in this trauma trance. Like there's benefits to it. Amos Wilson talked about this. I know rewards to being anti-Black. So don't take that out of the equation.
Well, when Dr. Curry was talking about his trials and tribulations, I said to myself, look, I ain't taking over this conversation. I can tell you about some trials and tribulations for your ass. Pardon my non-scholarly linguistics as I talk about it from a place of the frustration. In terms of sabotage, in terms of not getting the funding, in terms of writing the grant that scored the highest among all the grants and didn't get it because of some excuse and all this other stuff that occurs, and the sabotage and the sending in Black people on your staff. And look, I had some anti-Black people do something that was so crazy. There was a grand jury investigation of me. So I can tell you stories about Black Trojan horses for white supremacy and the stuff that they do. I want to focus next time we talk, and as much as we can now, on strategic ways in which we can do things that can break people out of the trance, because it can be done. That's the point I want to make clear. It can be done. It could be done with Black people, no matter where they are inside of this matrix. But I think the opportunity has to be created, though.
No, and I would agree with that. I think we also have to look at media, manipulation, media, because what we're talking about is indoctrination. I do reviews of media all the time, specifically for the purpose. Matter of fact, one of the things I've set up since this pandemic, or since this quarantine especially, is a conversation on how fathers can talk to their sons using media and breaking down what they're being presented. So I did a review, for example, of the recent Netflix film on Madam C.J. Walker, and the complete reimagination regarding Black men and Black males of all ages in that, where they literally created a fictitious historical narrative, which was very Color Purple-esque, right? To reimagine Black males across the board. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't called for. It didn't contribute to the story.
Wasn't true.
It wasn't true, but it left you with the idea that Black males are nothing but boogeymen and monsters. And the only solution for the Black community was for Black women to have this Shangri-La, kind of living in a mansion with only each other next to a Rockefeller as the solution to, Black issues. So what I talk about is how to dismantle those images and ideas and draw them out for us to be able to see clearly, because I don't think there's any escaping the media narratives in 2020, from smartphones to social media to billboards. Even it's almost inescapable. So
that's why decoding is important,
and that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, decoding, because that's another aspect of this discussion that makes it difficult to talk about what's going on in the world. So when I post, for example, on social media, I post about intimate partner violence, homicide, where you actually see Black men as victims. I do that because I'm surprised at how many people will tell me that Black men can't be. Even Black men themselves will tell me.
Black male privilege, they call it.
Black male privilege, absolutely. So if you have these historical occurrences, these real life, everyday occurrences happening, but your ideological view is inundated with media, manipulation, you can watch it happen and still say this is not happening. Right. He got shot in his face by his wife, but that didn't really happen. Well, if we don't decode and break down the ideology, that's how we're going to continue to approach it.
It's not that what I have seen oftentimes is that there's a rationalization of the harm. Like, well, what did he do to her? He cheated on her. Right. I understand. It's not that it didn't happen. People sometimes celebrate it like, well, damn, I understand. He should have cheated. Learn how to keep it in the hands.
Then you're pointing to multiple things, because there are some that say that doesn't happen. Then there are those that have been indoctrinated into hyper empathizing with one group. So you're exactly right. When we see an act of abuse, the first question I see, particularly from feminists, is, well, I wonder what he did to cause her to respond that way. But
sociologists are blaming the victim.
Absolutely. Yeah. But when the situation is the other way around, it's he needs to go to jail, he needs to be on death row. So there's no empathizing. But that's one of the ways that we see that indoctrinating working, is who we empathize with, who we regard, who we allow to be human, and who isn't. That's right. And that becomes part of the decoding work that needs to be done.
But that's what I'm saying. We've accepted misandric aggression against Black men and boys as somehow bringing us closer to civility. Because there's you got to think about, there's nothing in Black people that you should be able to see a little boy harmed, a little Black boy harmed or beaten by his mother, that should make us be like, well, I guess he deserved it, right? Like we've internalized these kinds of dehumanized narratives and scripts within our own psyche, and we read and use them to interpret the world, right? And the problem with that is that unless we have a severe intervention, right? And this is the part where I think that data doesn't work, because I spent years preventing people with data about this. Black people, my own people, like, this isn't true. Look at this. And it becomes some kind of gymnastic, right? So there's a deep religious belief in the hatred of Black men, almost as if they're the incarnation of evil.
But I think the term accept is problematic. That Black people are accepting this. To me, it's equivalent of saying we're accepting English over Swahili. All we know is English. And we don't know there's a Swahili or that there's even a choice. And I do think that language is very deliberate. And I think that indoctrination, training, and conditioning to think this way is really more of what's going on than the intentionality behind the term accept. Because every time I talk to Black people about the trans, and I don't call it the trans when I'm talking to you all using that terminology. I use different terminology that's more accessible when I talk to the community, to make sure that everybody, regardless of where they are, can understand it. But the bottom line is that they don't even know they're doing what they're doing, that they're doing what they're doing. I've gone to Black women's conferences where the sisters were mad at Black men. They had sons with them, by the way, babies, boys with them. and they were mad at black men, and they were just going off and talking all this stuff about black men not being no good and blah, etc. And I'll very respectfully and make sure my body language is as neutral looking as possible, because I already look like I'm supposed to be killing folks. I said, do you realize that you are teaching your son that being a black male is bad?
Right.
Why you do all of this? Do you also realize that a lot of black boys are raised by women, and that they're completely in charge of their worldview, and could be the ones that can be the architect of their worldview? And you are being the architect of the worldview right now, while you low rating black men in their presence and not giving them any critical thinking advice around coming to their own conclusion. So the young man might grow up and do whatever he's going to do, but whatever he does, it often is not connected to what he's accepted. It's connected to what he's experienced and had no contrasting information to come to another conclusion. And that's how black people are conditioned in this society, that the only conclusion is to be of benefit to whiteness. And white people don't like black men, they're killing them. So, like you said, Zakiya, there must be something wrong. If I drive down the street and a brother has his back to a cop with his handcuffs on, I don't get alarmed, because the N-word must have done something.
Oh yeah.
And I've talked to large groups of people who have that impulse and asked them, why do you have that impulse? After we show them the data that's coming out about all the false incarcerations, blah, 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 given all this evidence of inappropriate incarceration and over incarceration of black men, why do you assume that he must have done something?
Can we go back to the pathological, Dr. Cleo, you mentioned among black feminists, them having this pathological narrative about black men and boys while having sons. I have also noticed that, and I'm also very confused because I'm a mother first, and I know how I feel about both of my children. And my son was the first child that I gave birth to. And I, have had some experiences, with him in his early life that showed me how anti-black, and particularly anti-black male, this society is. And so my response is antithetical to that I have seen some black feminists have, even with sons. And for me, I understand that I have the control over molding him and how he feels about himself as a young black man, because I know that he's going to get negative messages at school or in the community. So my home has to be a refuge and an affirmation place. And so I'm wondering, by those black feminists who have sons, do they even consciously realize that they are actually reaffirming the negative messages and the negative self-worth that these young men get from the world? And if they don't know it intentionally, are they willing to do the work to figure out how to change how they interact even with their own children? Because one of the things that I saw this morning that struck me and broke my heart, there's a meme on Instagram from the New York some institute, and it highlighted the suicide rates of black boys from 5 to 12 years old, and that it's actually increased in the last several years. And so I'm like, 5 to 12, damn, that's young. That these babies, literally in my mind, are giving up life. And so to me, I feel like there's some indication that they are not finding home as a refuge like I hope my children are, and they're not getting the affirmations, that they need in the home.
Well, Zakiya, real quickly on the bright side, from my experience, these mothers, once they realize what they're doing and the damage being done is respectfully and clearly broken down, they love their child. Even the feminists, anti-black male, feminists, instinctively loves their child, and they think that being a feminist, because they've been influenced by some of the people that Dr. Curry already referenced, that this kind of language, even though it's anti-black male, is a saving grace for them. But when I break it down to them that it's not, and give them real world examples and logical cause and effect reasons, and ask them to actually take a look at whether what they're doing is having beneficial impact or not, and they realize that it's not, so many of them, more often than not, come closer and want some new skills, because they don't want to be harmful, but they did not know they were being harmful. My own sister, I've caught my own sister. This is in the past. Things have changed since then. Walking in and she's talking to her ex-boyfriend, and she's mad at calling him those words that you've heard before out of anger, with the little baby boy walking around her knees. And I had to tell her respectfully, that's very important, not going off on people. And we can't be re-traumatizing Black people. We have to deflect trauma and not create trauma, which some of us do in anger toward Black people, calling them coons and all this other stuff, which is not helpful. But anyway, to make a long story short, or a long story long, our community wants to do better. And with proper engagement, most people I have found are willing to come out of toxic behavior, particularly once they've learned that it's toxic, but they usually don't know that it's toxic. Sit your Black ass down. They don't realize that they're racializing and objectifying their Black child and telling them that their skin color is disposable when they say things like this. They don't want to do harm. And often when they realize they're doing harm, they are willing to be involved in some effective strategic change work.
The thing is, the white vigilantism, though. I mean, I'm on a complete board, but the white vigilantes that are deputizing themselves to kill Black men and boys, that's going to require something, a grassroots effort and
guns too.
Black people are really ready to accept. I don't think we've been conditioned out of dealing with violence in our face and been very much complacent with it, right? So we have to. How do we organize around a situation where any white person could be legitimately an enforcer of death against Black people, specifically Black men and boys, at any time for any cause? That's a different kind of problem. That's a political and social problem. But I don't think that we have the options here in the United States yet to deal with that. Because unless we're talking about armed self-defense, how are we going to get police? How are we going to get Black communities, Black churches to think about the Black community in such a way that they need protection for whites? I don't know if that's something that's on the radar. I don't know if many Black people can actually talk in those terms despite what's happening. I mean, if COVID-19 has exposed anything, it's the fact that the government and the rule of law do not and will not serve you, even if you're a citizen. So there has to be some kind of reckoning or serious discussion about how we deal with the onslaught from the white community.
I think that's a private conversation. I don't think that's a public conversation. It's a private conversation.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about it here, but I'm with it. I think we have examples in the past that have held off white vigilantes and did that well. I think Robert and Mabel Williams, for folks who are not familiar with them, to research them. I mentioned earlier the Deacons of Defense and so many others. Now there, is the Huey P. Newton Gun Club down in Texas. I know they have done some demonstrations that have protected the community from white vigilantes. So there are small groups across the country. We're just not everywhere. And then also, some of us just don't necessarily have that consciousness that we need to, legally and arm ourselves to protect ourselves from vigilantes.
Well, we also have to be clear. This is not limited, at all to vigilantes, because what we saw even with the situation with Arbery was the DA's involvement, right?
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah,
the police's involvement. So we know. I was watching the Atlanta child murder series on HBO about the early 1980s killings of Black kids, particularly Black boys. And there was a period where Black men and women, mostly Black men, were actually patrolling the community. And one of the first things that began to happen is they were labeled as vigilantes themselves.
Right.
And so when you have the police and the DA contributing to criminalizing the people who are protecting their communities from those who are actually damaging it, that's a narrative we have to prepare for in these kind of strategies as well. Because I think we know in 2020 it would definitely happen. Go ahead.
What I want to say though is that this is what I mean. Like, it's not going to be simple as we did defend ourselves with guns, because the levels that we're dealing with, from DAs to judges, to the police officers themselves. So we're going to have a conversation about the law not working for us.
Yes,
and that's what I mean is that I think that even with everything else, people were so hopeful that the law work out, even with these white boys getting arrested, right? We see that somehow as a symbolic victory, even though they were chilling for 2 months on their couch.
Right.
This is what I meant when I said there has to be a reckoning about the structures and the systems that we're dealing with. We expect to live in a world even though we accept that we're not equally treated, right? Even though we have a recognition that we're not equally treated, we have a hope that the law, that society, that the goodwill of people will recognize the humanity of our people. And given that that's a constant failure, we have to start talking seriously about other alternatives to that, right?
Yes.
And that's not just about the decolonization of our minds, though it's heavily involved with it. But there has to be some real political education here.
Yes.
And I think that Black lawyers, Black educators, Black police officers, these people really need to start doing better with their communities and community relations to talk about what can be done, if anything, because it doesn't make sense to live in a world where white people are being socialized that they can kill people with impunity, and then Black people are socialized in the same world to depend on those white people who somehow taught them or their neighbors, start Facebook fan clubs for talking about how they're good Christian men protecting white folks.
Yeah, GoFundMe pages
for recognition of our lives.
I think it still goes back to something that's foundationally connected to colonialism, is that, and much of what I say, I've literally tested it, and it's not just anecdotal or me running my mouth, but we don't value Black people. I believe everybody on this interface does, and we have some peers. But as a general psychological state of mind, we don't value Black people. And we have to unlearn that tendency first before we do anything that's going to be reliable to deflect the wake of being in a hostile environment with white supremacist mythologists. We do not, the way we talk, the N-word and the objectification of ourselves, that's a normal part of the way we actually refer to each other. There was a famous song that you all heard. I was on the radio saying, I ain't going back and forth with these. Remember that song? Mm-hmm. Did you all hear it?
I'm not sure.
Okay, can I cuss on your show?
Yeah,
okay, ahead. All right. There's a song that was a huge hit. I forgot the guy's name, but the song was, I'm not going back, and I don't use this word in my life at all. I'm using it right now to make a point. I'm not going back and forth with these niggas. Zakiya know what I'm talking about. It was a hit. It was a hit song. And I spoke at Brown University, and I said to a mixed audience, I said, white folks, Jews in particular, could you imagine a song being on radio saying, I'm not going back and forth with these kikes? Mm-hmm. I'm not going back and forth with these chinks. I'm not going back and forth with these peckerwoods. And of course, they all looked all shocked. And the Black people in the audience knew I was coming to them next. Mm-hmm. So they were bracing themselves. I said, can you imagine a song being on the radio that's a top 10 hit saying, I'm not going back and forth with these niggas? Mm-hmm. And these were people who were academics, if you will, who had not challenged these norms and might have been bopping to this song because it has such a good groove in their car. We are being trained all the time to look at Black people as mincemeat and disposable, particularly Black men, but Black women as well.
Disposable.
And until we unlearn that, we are not going to be reliable. As we all talked about, we've been fighting against what killed this young brother recently since before the Black Panthers. But we fight and then we get exhausted because we're not fully in the fight. We're in question of the value of the fight because we're in the question of the value of Black people.
Okay, now I'm going to put up two images that I want Zakiya to respond to, and then everybody can kind of jump in. The first one was the one she mentioned a moment ago, and I just wanted to give people a chance to actually see it. So you should be able to see it there. As far as Black males, this comes from the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research, New York University. Right, Black males ages 5 to 11 are more likely to die by suicide compared to their white peers. And then the other, let me get this. I'm not as quite as savvy with these as I'd like to be. Hold on, here it is. So the other is actually a Twitter post. I hope you guys can kind of see that, and I want Zakiya to kind of talk to us about this one.
So as you can see, that's me responding to Kamala Harris. You know, again, to me, it's performances as she was a prosecuted and heavily incarcerated Black men and boys during her tenure in California. But, to me, saying that, no words or actions can erase the pain of the family. But what is missing, in my opinion, is an actual, she has power, right? And what's missing to me is like what she is going to do sitting in her seat as a U.S. senator. No mention of I will be introducing a bill to make sure this will never happen again, right? Like it's all of this placation, and performing outrage without any actual material consequences. And I'm calling her out for that because you are sitting in a position of power and you have power to do something about it. Will you? And of course, obviously, she didn't respond. But this is an example of being tired of people like that. Of people like that being in the power to do something and then not doing it. It's a performing outrage when it comes to Black men and boys. I could not imagine, like similar to Cleo saying, some other group, constantly being lynched, right? Whether it's the police, whether it's these vigilantes, and even with some intracommunal violence, since we're talking about how we feel about each other. I cannot imagine, if this was a white woman and this being the same response. There would be
never would be.
There would be a goddamn law in that white woman's name tomorrow, right?
Because white people have cultural cohesion. White people are in an unsaid and often said agreement to always affirm each other and have each other's back. We used to do that, and whenever we did that, white people were keen enough to interrupt it violently and viciously to traumatize us back into the trance where we would be passive and not be natural in terms of being actively interested in self-preservation. They have interrupted that, and we're still in the trance where we think self-preservation should be second guessed, and should I do it or should I not do it? These white folks, Asian folks, and Latino folks are not in question of anything. I mean, Black people all the time, when we talk about our issues, talk about Black and brown. I speak Spanish fluently. When I go to meetings, which is rare, but sometimes I do, that are predominantly, they don't say Black and brown, they say brown and Latino. They don't add the extra, stuff, because they're not in question about whose back they should have. We are in question about whose back we should have, not because we're genetically defective, not because being Black is deficient, but we speak English. And English is built in the linguistics of English is anti-Black implications. And we already know what those are, particularly so-called scholars. We know what those anti-Black everyday terms that we use in Black people, because we're so creative, we invent some new anti-Black terms to put some soul in it. You know what I'm saying? And those other kind of stuff that we do. We have to dehypnotize ourselves out of this trance, folks, or else no matter what we say, our cognitive capacity might get it, but our behavioral places are not going to get it because they're not synthesized. We are unnaturally developed in this culture to be anti-Black, and most of us are. Look at the famous people like Dr. Curry mentioned, and talk about what the media, what Dr. Johnson mentioned, talk about the media implication. All of it implies, if you can't even find a Black on Black love story in popular television. You can find a Black person chasing somebody white. You can find white on white love stories, and babies, Black babies. This is why I think the term choice is problematic. Are eating their popcorn or now laters or Snickers or whatever sugar, Captain Crunch, whatever they're eating, watching this stuff for no critical analysis. Right. A vast pool of anti-Blackness, including police brutality and murder, with no permission given to engage at all critically. So they grow up and become adults who have an impulse to sabotage themselves. And then we get mad at them sometimes and re-traumatize them for not acting right, instead of putting their behavior in logical environmental context and talking to them in ways that will wake them up instead of traumatizing them again.
But we also displace our political energy, right? I mean, I saw that post that you sent to Kamala Harris, and at the same time, I was thinking, we Black people have to appeal to people who are supposed to represent us to do something, pass a policy, pass a law, to say what we know is not just, should be treated as such. But then at the same time that you have Black men being shot in the street, you have white women claiming that they were touched inappropriately 20 or 30 years ago, getting the full weight of the law with no evidence.
and
right?
media attention,
and media attention, because of their outrage. And to me, there's just a stark contrast between the kinds of energy that because Black people support this stuff too, because overwhelmingly the people who benefited from Me Too are white women. But we put our energies to the believe her, where this brother can't be believed because he's dead. So we value, and it's such a problem, not just of how we think about our own people, but how we see justice being delivered and what the future of the world looks like for certain people. We out here protesting for white women who benefit from getting the jobs and living in the homes that white men built for them in safety. Some of the lowest numbers of homicide in the country, if not the world. Whereas
and incarceration.
And incarceration. Whereas Black men and boys have practically the highest. And we out here trying to get Black leaders to look at evidence, to look at something that's videotaped as evidence that this man's life had humanity. But a rumor from 30 years ago somehow suffices for white women. We have a problem with what we aspire to make the world look like, right? And this is, like I said, this is a political problem, but the depths of our own dehumanization of trying to create a world where white people can thrive, we somehow mistakenly believe that these are our values as well, right? This brother's not going to get a chance to offer his testimony. Right, we talk about this every time a Black man is killed. There is no other story but the white man's story, because all the Black men are killed. You kill them, and even when we have the video, somehow it's the perspective of the white vigilante or the white police officer when Black men have their hands up, or like Tamir Rice. Like, I was pissed off about that. How does a 12-year-old boy? They said the 12-year-old boy should have known not to play with the toy gun. So the expectation is the 12-year-old boy should have known. Right? Somehow in his own cultural education, somebody should have told him that you're really a danger to society. Right? It's the Black community's fault for not letting this Black boy know that he was really a danger. Or as I say in the book, a beast cub. Right? This is what we have to address. And that part has to be something based on real action, the real doing something. Protests aren't doing anything. But all we do are these symbolic protests. Nothing changes. So we have to interrupt economies, money. We have to start building organizations that are going to fundamentally make their duty to protect the Black community, or at least work around these things until we have a better option.
And we also have to move past respectability, critiques of ourselves, where you get these kind of statements that, well, if he didn't speak with so much bass in his voice, if he didn't play with a toy gun, if he dressed appropriately, if he kept his hair up, if he was more polite, these kinds of self-critical analyses that really don't help anything but further pathologize us become part of the problem, right? And by the time we get to situations where there really is no cause for such critique, we still find new ways to make it. So if we look at this case that just came about where I think it's in New Hanover, right? The mother and son whose house was stormed, I think, by police officers who were technically looking for another person. I'm already hearing people say, well, they should have been nicer. They should have been more kind to the police. They kicked in their door. And I'm like, what? This has nothing to do with that.
See, what we don't understand.
They're asking Black people to be abnormal. That's not normal. You have a right to defend yourself and your property in your own space. That's not normal. We're being socialized not to protect ourselves and literally not to love ourselves. And I think that's ridiculous. And I reject it.
We can't handle that the people that look like all of us know to be fictitiously like Jesus can be evil. We can't handle the fact that all those excuses for killing Tamir Rice were excuses. They want to kill Black men. There's a significant element of people among whites who just want to kill Black men and women if they get the opportunity, and they look at us as an embodied threat to the myth of their relevance, the myth of their superiority, and we're clearly not any of those things, and they know it, and their psychology, like a serial killer, invested in fragmenting the world in a way where it relapses into the myth of their superiority, and they want to kill us. They don't matter about no gun. Those are all excuses. They want to kill us. And Black people need to understand that. And part of how we condition ourselves to get a critical analysis of where we live needs to include all the evidence that leads to that. Because I remember one time somebody said, you've heard this before, that, well, a Black girl looks more adult. You heard it before. No, a Black baby looks like a Black baby. And everybody knows a baby when they see a baby. But there's an element among whites, and many of them are in the White House now, who see being a Black person as a threat to them. That's why they got us marrying white folks, so we won't be low to Black people anymore. That's a new strategy they would not have done 30 or 40 years ago, because they were very much against interracial dating and their women, quote unquote, being caught up with a Black penis. But now they're inviting the Black penis because they know one of the side effects of that invitation is not being loyal to Black anymore, therefore not being a challenge to white anymore. And they change up their strategies, and we don't understand what they're doing, so we don't get our children and our communities ready to deflect their newest agenda. Like you hear people saying crap like, well, one drop, what's the cliche about the drops and blood? I forgot. It's so ridiculous, I can't remember it. You've heard about the one drop rule. That's irrelevant. If Barack Obama wasn't half white, he would not have ever been allowed to be in that White House as the president. And we need to be real clear about these things. And we're afraid to be clear. One parent told me, well, several parents told me over the years, I don't want my child angry. And I asked, I've heard it. You must have heard it before. It can't just be me. Yeah, I asked them, angry at who? Because they're telling Black people to sit their Black asses down and calling them the N-word and teasing them because of their lips and their nose. So you don't want them to be mad at who? And they've never thought about it before. But they've never allowed themselves to have the whole thought, just like those brothers in Atlanta when I asked them what color, and they went into this catatonic state and started moving around. They had never before allowed themselves to say, well, we really mean Black, but we're trying not to offend white people. They had not articulated that before.
Yeah, and that's we have a problem with reconciling with anger, and especially in regard to respectability politics. But instead, you'll be taught, especially as a Black male, how to whistle classical music, how to wear certain kinds of clothes. I think Rashawn Ray talked about this on NPR earlier about signaling, where you wear an alumni sweater so you may not get shot. We're taught those kind of coping mechanisms as opposed to actually reconciling with the justification for anger. And its expression. Absolutely.
That's what I mean. The resistance is what we moralize and condemn in our own communities. Right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Because the anger comes from a place of our own humanity. And I've heard this all the time. I mean, I think people, one of the things that happened before I left is there's this ongoing rumor that I'm somehow a madman. I'm just crazed with anger. Mm-hmm. Right?
I keep telling people, Dr. Curry's laughing at y'all far more than you think he's angry at you. He's laughing at you.
Because I can't take these people seriously. But this is what I'm saying is that you look at the trajectory, the downward mobility of Black males in this country, poverty, unemployment, incarceration, etc. It's no secret. It's no secret that vigilantism would be next. I mean, this is what follows when we're looking at genocides as well. You rhetorically eviscerate and take away the character and humanity of a group of people, and then it empowers other people to act this way towards them. And because we're not reading this as a situation of dehumanization, we think it's just discrimination and a few bad apples. We don't understand the cultural trajectory that's fundamentally being involved and institutionalized every time a Black man gets killed in this country and the society doesn't respond. Right. So when the society says this is OK, then we see this as part of justice, a part of protection, as part of security. Then it allows white people to extend the social contract to not just acute property, individual liberty and life, but you have to preserve that. You have to kill a few niggas to get there. And this is where we're at right now in the 21st century.
Guess what? None of this is going to change until we change it.
I agree.
I completely agree.
But I think. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I thought I cut that. No, I mean, I just think the steps to change it are the piece that we're going to have to get really serious about. Because I'm with you. I mean, I've heard so many different diagnoses of the problem. I think the diagnoses are interesting intellectually, but in terms of what I have to see, I mean, there's no reason that I should have to be in Scotland where there are practically no white people with guns. Like the police don't even walk around with guns. These people actually wave to me. I'm still a little unnerved by white people waving at me all the time. But
right.
It creates a kind of anxiety. but the
Kind
reality
of
situation
anxiety.
is, but the reality situation is from here, right? From here, I have to look at my people dying. I have to think about the people I come from, people that look like me, my own culture, right? Brother from the South, going out and being shot like an animal, simply because white people have decided. And I don't buy the fear thing, right? I think negrophobia genesis is real, but there is a deliberate intentionality on the part of white people to destroy and kill black people. This is not I'm scared, because they seem to represent all their fear in terms of domination. They didn't just accidentally say I'm scared of the darker world. They went there for resources. And we have to accurately diagnose that white people have a commitment in the 21st century America to manage black people's population levels by killing all black men.
That's right.
It's their strategy. They've decided on it. So until we start having real conversations from academics, activists, lawmakers, whoever they are, about how racism is functioning to destroy the sex ratios in our community and limit what black people can do politically, socially, and in terms of reproducing themselves in the next century, I'm just not that interested. Because every time we have this conversation,
please repeat that. I think that's that. Please repeat that. That's so important.
Which part? That I'm not interested in talking to these other black people.
No, talking about the control of our reproduction and controlling all of that. Repeat that. Yeah.
Listen. In every genocidal act in the 20th century, the way that they made sure the group cannot reproduce themselves is to kill civilian men between the ages of 15 and 55. They took away the ability of the group to culturally and biologically exist after the large threats of violence. Because, and you know, I think I was in California one day and I was arguing with a black feminist and a white liberal in the audience, and they were upset that I was focusing on men. And I said, listen, I'm asking you a very biological question. If you want to exterminate a group of people, what happens if you let one male survive? How many people can that young boy impregnate over the centuries to regrow his race or his group of people? I was like, but you let one woman survive, you can only get one kid every year. I was like, this is how white people think. And I'm not saying that as like a throw-off analogy. I'm talking about this is what they write in turn of the century arguments about why you kill men. Because if you leave one alive, he can resurrect the whole race. So you have to eliminate all the men that are capable of bearing children. This isn't some biblical notion. This is what people are writing when they're trying to kill off different ethnic and racial groups of people throughout history. So if we see the same kind of tactics being deployed on our people in the United States that sees them as deviant, that sees their biological threats to their race as being the foundation while white people have to control and manage them so that they don't outpopulate them or they lose the republic, then we have a different kind of consideration to make that goes beyond us just saying that racism is permanent or that racism means that we're non-human. White people are not making a mistake about this. They've done it too well, and they've perfected various technologies to make sure that there's a public and social acquiescence to the strategies they use to eliminate black men and boys in the United States and abroad. So that means that we have to start talking about that. We do not have the research. We don't have the activism. We don't have the educators and clinicians. There's not social workers. There's not primary educators that are teaching our people that racism functions in this way. What we have been over-socialized with is the idea of intersectionality, recognition, and privilege. Words that mean nothing in the midst of people killing people. And this is the problem we have. We still think of racism as a discrimination frame. We're thinking like privilege makes a lot of sense if you're talking about I want what you have. But in a world where you like, we're just going to start killing and hanging people, you talking to a white person that's intent on hanging you, not changing, is not going to be very persuasive. And I think that we need a realization that before Trump and certainly after Trump, we have more white people that are very much in the belief now that you have to eliminate black people so that white people can thrive. And this these brothers, right, are victims of that kind of 21st century thinking that really reflects 19th century ethnology. And again, I don't know how we're going to handle different strategies about it, but in terms of what we can control, the relationship between the academy, the activists, and the practitioners, this message has to become the center focus of what we discuss and how we're holding people accountable for here on out. Because the criticisms of liberalism reform, the processes of resocialization and education, the intersectional coalition building have done nothing to stop the deaths of these black men, period.
Well, I just want to underscore the alarm here. If it wasn't for that video, we would have never knew this even happened.
Absolutely.
Which happens all over the country. Yeah.
Right. We wouldn't. And the video was put out by happenstance, based on somebody else's false calculation about what the benefit of the video would have been. But there's murders like this had happened that we didn't get the video.
Yeah.
We are in a crisis, y'all. We're being murdered.
Yeah. Apparently their lawyer recorded it thinking that it would work in their defense.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that I think contributes and doubles down on these deaths is when I hear academics begin to fight over whose deaths should be paid attention to altogether, particularly when we talk about police-initiated homicides on Black men. There's this conversation about who we shouldn't be paying attention to and who we need to ignore because Black men have the privilege of being talked about. But the only time you hear Black men being talked about is when they're killed.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most ridiculous arguments. But one of the points that Dr. Curry pointed out, I wanted to focus in on, and I don't want us to lose the fact that there has always and there always will be a Black underground. And I think we see some of them on social media, right? There's a sister out of St. Louis, or Ferguson Nyota. She's Yes. So there is a Black underground who are pushing back against these dominant narratives. I count myself as one of them, although, I kind of straddle the fence because I am in paid activism, but I do push back when I have an opportunity just to create the dissonance. There's too many people who, you'll be surprised how many people are in these spaces who feel just like I do, but they are scared to speak up. I don't have that kind of, right. They're scared to speak up. And the other piece is, I think, is that when we do have people in those spaces like me or like Dr. Curry, we need the community to stand up and support them when they are under attack, right? Like when Dr. Curry became under attack, there was a bunch of people who came to his defense. We need people in the community to support those of us who have courage to stand up in the face of white supremacy and not acquiesce all the time. And not to lose sight that we have always resisted. We are resisting now, even though it seems like we're not, or it seems like the people who are doing the most harm have the most visibility. I love to see I love that Twitter thread when Very Smart Brothers were being dragged on Twitter. Like, there are people that are completely awake and not going for it anymore. So I just want to honor that in this space, that there are folks who are resisting. Absolutely. And that has to be a part of our ongoing strategy, is to increase the visibility and increase the numbers of those of us who are pushing back against these narratives.
Now we have to tell our people the truth, right? But we also have to be smart. We need strategy. We have to organize, because what I've been shocked by is the amount of visibility these people have to change and contour the narrative. Because it's not just, I stayed off of Twitter for a long time because I didn't see the point of it. But when I look at it, when I see how who gets the tweets and the retweets and the likes and the shares and who's liking them, there is a industrial complex about social media where certain people are being pushed up as the prevalent voices of Black issues in the Black community. And I don't know how we combat that, given how many people are educated through social media. But that has to be a key platform, because I think that you're absolutely right. We have a Black underground. We have resistance, especially on YouTube. You have lots of brothers and sisters that are actively speaking out about this. But we need a better medium, like a news venue, back like Essence and Jet was back in the day. We need something that appeals to that sensibility, that's trying to reconcile with how we deal with these problems. Because what I see on social media is people being lulled into reading everything through gender politics and through this kind of liberal democratic national platform. I mean, it's like Black activists and Black academics are trying to sell Black people on, yes, Black people are dying, but if you vote for the Democratic Party, if you support the DNC, that'll make all of it better. And look how coalitional we are, right? It's almost a fantasy land. It's like pretend, like we haven't seen any evidence, and Biden coming out speaking on behalf of this young man doesn't really convince me, given that he's probably not going to be president. So it's one of these things where there's a vacuous appeal to recognition and law when the law keeps dropping the ball. And go ahead.
I want to illuminate a success story of sorts, a microcosm, I must admit. But I was in Los Angeles during the time that O.J. Simpson was on trial. And most black people didn't even like O.J. Simpson because he was very anti-black, and he would say stuff, "I'm not black, I'm O.J." Some of you might have heard him say that. However, because of the skill of Cochran and how he was able to linguistically shape the narrative in ways that got black jurors to come out of their trance, they white supremacy trauma trance, and not vote for OJ, but vote for a win in the presence of of white terrorism toward black people, which is what the LAPD had practiced on black people for years. And he woke them black people up and made those black people vote to free OJ. And it wasn't about OJ, because we didn't even like OJ. It was about the fact that we wanted to, mostly due to the strategies of Johnny Cochran and his linguistics, we wanted to win for black people and not let the racist white supremacist LAPD win. So my point in telling that story is that there's strategies that we can do that can get black people to come out of the white accommodationist tendencies and go against how some of them might even feel on their unconscious in terms of the white accommodations unconscious a lot of black people have, and still do the right thing in terms of winning for black people symbolically and politically. We can do that kind of move when there's the proper elements in place. Even though Barack and Michelle, as far as I'm concerned, weren't that helpful to black people who had never voted before and never wanted to vote got out and voted because of what that phenomenon made them feel like, because of how the narrative was told. We can use narrative too, to well, obviously strategic narrative to create transformation, particularly when we create means of communication like this, like social media, etc., videos or on YouTube that strategically are about trans-breaking narratives for black people.
Oh, absolutely. But we have to. This is what I mean. Like, it seems to me that when white people talk about their own salvation or the issues in their communities, you have white feminists that are white supremacists. You have white gay people that are white supremacists. You have white hetero people that are white supremacists. It seems that despite their disagreements, every push for their rights or for law and recognition still reifies the cultural expectation that they're above black people, right, and everybody else. And when we talk, despite the contributions of our own people, we seem to think that any difference between a black person, be it class-based, be it gender, sexual orientation, be it education, etc., somehow should serve as the natural division of our people. The black, whatever, I've heard people talk about a black gay agenda. The black gay agenda still should be pro-black, right? If there's a need for a black,
that's not possible.
I hear me out though. If there's a need for what black feminists have been suggesting is a black feminist agenda where they see these issues, right? That still needs to be pro-black. We're not going to convince everybody to be one identity, but there seems to be something in the very foundation of the murder and death of black people that necessitates us to be on the same page about black life. And I think that what ends up happening is that when we have conversations about difference, right? We're having conversations about the problems in our communities. We somehow believe that the white society offers something better. So we're willing to accept that black men have to pay the price for that social elevation and climb to civility. And even if we end up not being able to agree, at the very basis, it seems to me unacceptable that we can entertain lethal violence as the basis by which we should control black people. And even when those groups of people claim that they're interested in civility, liberation, and democratic societies, all things that I think are an illusion. But nevertheless, even if that's their worldview, right, we need to figure out how to address the problem in our community. And if people are using death as a way to use, if that's the Trump political card, then we can dominate the black community because we're going to have white people eliminate most of them. And that's part of a strategy for the foreseeable future, that eventually these people won't matter because they won't be in universities, They won't have political representation. Most black men won't be educated. If that's the idea, then we have to start attacking these things as fundamentally anti-black and not serving any kind of liberatory function amongst black people, our neighborhoods, our communities.
I agree. Absolutely. And we got some trans-breaking work to do. Pardon my redundancy.
No, I understand.
Because the filter is important. You know, the filter meaning that the filter is clean or it's dirty. Mm-hmm. So the information can get through. If the filter is dirty, which it is with white folks and their stuff, we can't even hear it to do transformative work. Mm-hmm. One thing that I tell people that has been very powerful in some instances, not all, but in some, is that white lesbian feminists voted for Trump. White gays voted for Trump. Oh, all kinds of white folks who even like each other voted under the rubric which was implied by Make America Great Again and Trump saying we'll never ignore you again, that white life had value. And we're going to invest in the concept of valuing white people, valuing white power, and valuing whiteness. Damn this, I don't like the dykes and whatever else they didn't like. And the homosexuals and the this and that and the other. Y'all want to go have some power? Let's go do it. And black people need to be talking in ways where we get beyond these things, but not get beyond them without talking about our differences. I mean, for example, one of the nuances here, which I think is important to mention based on my own personal experience, is that I'm not a heterosexual man. And the reason I mention that, not because I go around with a t-shirt and buttons and saying that, because it's not relevant as far as I'm concerned in most instances, not necessarily even now, but it was earlier said that there's an attack on heterosexual black men. There's an attack on black men who stand up for black people. There's an attack on black men who don't want to be women. And I don't want to be a woman because I'm mad at women. I'm not a woman, you know. I'm not trying to be one. And I have to talk like that in this society because there's black men being encouraged to be women and being rewarded for it. And black men who won't let themselves be women are being called the most dangerous thing on the planet next to white supremacists. Despite whatever their sexuality is in real life, if they come off in a way that's where they're not compromised based on a patriarchal definition of what a man's supposed to be, white people in their Trojan horses, which come in all kinds of different gay, lesbian, queer, etc., is going to be on them. Y'all understand what I'm saying?
Oh,
I want to put that nuance out there because a lot of people don't understand that nuance. Strong people are at risk.
Well, I think, but again, this is part of the social training. There have always been black gay men. These black men have been radicals. They've been Pan-Africanists. They've been social. I don't think that's the issue. I think we do have problems in our community that we could address and speak on at a different time. But the real issue here is, what is it about that sexual orientation that makes it okay to say, well, one black man who practices this sexual orientation has to be at war with another black man to such an extent that the death of one group of these black men is what brings about peace in the black community. That's what I don't understand. There's no data that suggests that only black men, only straight black men are bringing about all the homophobia in the black community. So we have a scapegoating problem.
Yeah, there's no data. There's an agenda.
Exactly.
The agenda, there's a divide and conquer agenda. There's unresolved hyper-patriarchal anxiety in black people, particularly among black males, because of the perpetual attacks on black men's manhood, masculinity, existence. And there's some what looks like dysfunctional, hyper-masculine compensatory responses to that's being called homophobic, but sometimes it's black male compromisophobia. You know what I'm saying? And so because we don't have rational conversations about the nuances, everything is thrown in whatever bag white people come up with. That's homophobic.
It's all deviance. It's all
right.
Deviance.
I mean, right. And it's not nothing homophobic about not wanting your child to be a girl. I'm not saying it's wrong or right. I'm saying that having some challenges in this particular society, given the perpetual compromise and attack on black men and the brutality toward black men, there should be some discussion about it. As opposed to you are homophobic because you want to have a discussion. Because white people say, no, don't discuss it. You're homophobic if you don't jump on my bandwagon. And there's a lot of black people who are mad at other black people for not accepting them and sending them to hell in the church, who go to white supremacy for sanctuary.
Right.
And
there's all kinds of black people, regardless of sexuality, who go to white supremacy for sanctuary. I mean, one of the problems that people have with Kamala Harris, who was putting men in jail, that she was going home to a white man after work.
Right.
That kind of concern about the dynamics there is not irrational or racist. You know, if black people are supposed can be racist, which I don't believe we can, based on the actual definition, but I'm telling you how we think.
Yeah.
The conclusions that we come to, and which don't require data.
Mm-hmm.
People are emotional, reactionary without data.
Yeah, but the path for liberation, and I agree, because the path for liberation for black men, straight, gay, etc., can't simply be in not being yourself, right? I mean, and I think that's what's being sold. The idea is that if you're a black man, you have to want to be a black woman, right? It's if you think like a black man, everything that you possibly think is flawed. So you should embrace this other way of thinking, right?
Or defer to it at the very least.
Defer to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a conversation to be had. I think black gay men have had this conversation as well, about how it becomes a synonym for femininity rather than maleness or masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
I see that a lot. It's a synonym for femininity.
Gay. Just so y'all can know, gay identity, similar to feminism, which are both white traps, white supremacy, collaborative traps that black people fall into. Gay identity is a problem. That's not the point of the show, and I don't want to derail it to something else. But gay, which is only about 50 years old, since white people say that's what homosexuals call themselves. James Baldwin did not call himself gay. He resisted the terminology for reasons that I don't want to get into on this show right now because I don't want to derail it. But gay identity is a problem. The gay LGBTQ construct is a racist, white supremacist construct wreaking havoc all over the diaspora, and has been set up under the guise of a political social justice move to practice sex trafficking in Africa and the Caribbean and all kinds of crazy stuff, and in this country. Right. So we need to have that conversation when there's time to have the conversation. But I just want to tell folks, particularly Dr. Curry, that gay identity is which I don't identify with and never have and never will, because I make informed decisions, is part of why we have a bunch of divisions, including the creation of an article talking about straight men are, that whole thing comes out of the problematic gay paradigm, which is hurtful to black people and black unity.
Well, let me be clear. This is the show is called the Onyx Report, and what we do here is we talk very plainly, very unapologetically about the lives of black men or black males across the board, and that also accounts across sexuality. So you're not shifting the conversation when you bring that element in. I just want you to be clear about that, and I appreciate it. The other side to it too is that there has to be an accounting for social equity. Right. Or not. I mean, excuse me, social equity, social real estate in regard to Black death. And what I mean by that is when we talk about black men being killed, that seems to be the only way, it's particularly heterosexual black male, the only way that they're received.
Allegedly heterosexual.
Well, right. But either way, that's the only time they're received without qualification. We don't have these debates about, like you really pointed to, we don't have these debates about their sexuality when they're dead, because they're a utility to a variety of other agendas, whether it be white liberals, whether it be black feminists. It's as long as they're useful and their deaths are useful, they're accepted. And it's as long as they're alive, there's a problem. And I think that becomes part of the difficulty of having these conversations, because as long as what we regard as a heterosexual presenting black masculinity, as long as that's received as a problem in and of itself, unless one is dead, how do you then begin to build any kind of political or even ideological framework that's rooted in being a solution to the black community? See, those are kind of questions that I'm interested in asking.
The thing is that this is what I meant when I said that there seems to be a retreat into white civility and their identity. Right? The idea is somehow that white homosexuals didn't participate in enslavement, Jim Crow.
Right.
Absolutely.
This confuses me.
Absolutely.
And this is what I'm saying. This confuses me. And again, it's always in the academy. So when I talk about the rape of black men by white men and white women, and I talk about how white queer British people went to colonies to practice sexual freedom, rape of Native men and boys, right? These things actually happen. Like, we have evidence that they happen. So what we get today is a translation of this in liberal politics, where somehow all that history becomes erased, and then gay white men and white women don't become part of patriarchy, even though they've been the main defenders and practitioners of rape, genocide, and murder. So
this is why
I'm saying that we have to question the issue. For me is not sexual identity. Black queer peoples, black, pick the issues that you're black and we're all affected by the leaf of until we get to this point, right? Until we get to the point of recognizing how they're still going to deal with the black gay body, and we understand the relationship that has a relationship to being seen as male, which is the same way they deal with straight black men. Then we're, if you look at hate crime numbers, black gay men are disproportionately affected. It's still the black male body, and somehow that seems to be so distant from how we talk about and how we activate this kind of discourse politically.
Well, some of those hate crimes are not from an external source in terms of sexuality. Mm-hmm. Some of those hate crimes are intra-group attack. For example, there was a white boy, just to show you how mythology creates a narrative that's not necessarily true. There was a white boy named, you've all heard of him, I can't think of his name right now, who was killed years ago, and it was all in the press. He was left out in the woods, tied up, and he became a symbol of anti-hate crime toward gays. And they found out that he was.
Is that the guy in Minnesota somewhere? Or?
I forgot now. It was in the Midwest, but they found out that one of the guys that killed him was his ex. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a traditional hate crime, though white gays used it and made money off of it. It helped to build their movement in terms of them creating a reason to have a movement. But some of the killings that are happening among same gender loving people, that's the word I use, by the way. I don't do gay or queer, none of them white folk stuff. It's people acting out on each other violently inside of a culture that's in another level of trauma, in addition to the trauma that Black people have already. And because people pimp it to get some more money to do hate crime legislation and lobbying, which usually is white people doing it for themselves, that nuance that I just mentioned is almost never, ever discussed. I mean, some of this, even among Black people, I call some of what happens with us self-hate crimes as opposed to hate crimes, because we are eating our own because white people have been eating us, and we're practicing the behavior of the larger culture.
I mean, Amos Wilson pointed to this many years ago in his book, Black on Black Crime. And I think that, what you're talking about is correct. And we see it even in intercommunal violence where, presenting heterosexual Black men kill other heterosexual Black men. So I think, so it's all around being inculcated in an anti-Black culture, in an anti-Black society. And of course, Black people are impacted by that.
But I mean, look, we know that intimate partner violence and homicide are disproportionately higher in Black communities because of these environmental reasons. Same thing in same-sex couples. Same thing between parental relations. Like, we just know that. The question is, how do our people adjust to that outside of a framework given to them by white people? Right? When we look at hate crimes, we often see or what they classify as hate crimes. We see anal penetration, sodomy. We see we see all these kinds of sexual acts on Black male bodies, regardless of their sexual orientation at all. Like, that's the thing. White power and white imposition engages Black male bodies the way that it sees fit. It doesn't matter what you affirm yourself.
That's right.
That's what I'm saying, is that the identitarian logic seems to be that if I call myself Black, queer, feminist, etc., somehow this gives me a different recognition in the eyes of white people. When in reality, whether or not you identify yourself in that way has absolutely no effect on what a white person with power is going to do to you. It doesn't matter if you're straight or gay. If you're going to be anally penetrated with a baton, a gun, or a screwdriver, your sexual orientation doesn't matter because the white person creates that for themselves. So what I'm saying is that we have to be critical about how we're deploying different identitarian terms or identity politics as if those are somehow moral badges that protect us from certain kinds of violence.
And what I'm saying, and I agree with what you just said, is that social political containers like gay and LGBTQ, etc., creates anti-Black cognitive dissonance in Black people.
Okay.
And I don't want to feed into that. And I'm encouraging, grown people can do what grown people are going to do. But I'm trying to alert you that all of this dissension, anti-Black dissension, that's being put in writing and republished, because that article on straight Black men being the devil was published again a year later. They did, because they weren't finished with the work that they wanted to do in terms of turning Black people. I'm talking about Black people in the LGBTQ or all these different nuances against Black men. So I think it's important that we understand some of these strategies that they use, including these identity strategies within the academy and within sexual identity. These are laboratories for anti-Black phenomena. Absolutely. That we don't realize is going on, that makes it more difficult for us because they look like us, and we get mad about the behavior. Well, we need to understand that even how we reference ourselves either helps or hurts. And gay, LGBTQ, and queer hurts.
Okay, well, let's we've been going for a minute, and I really appreciate all of you being willing to do this, especially on just short notice. And Dr. Curry, I know you are a number of hours ahead over there, and based on some of the posts I've seen you making this morning, I don't know if you even slept last night. So I want to give everybody a moment to give some closing thoughts as we kind of transition out of here. So maybe if we can actually start with Sister Zakiya, and then go to Dr. Cleo, Dr. Menago, and then Dr. Curry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really appreciate the space to, have this Black on Black conversation about our community and how we can hopefully move forward in a positive way. I'm still doing the work. I'm down to continue to do the work with all of you. I'm down to create this intervention that does not do the bait and switch, as you named it, Dr. Hasan, when it comes to really specifically looking at different things that happens to a particular subgroup in our community and how we support that. So I hope to stay in touch with all of you, and we can continue this conversation at another time, but not just a conversation, but continue doing this work.
Mm-hmm. I want to first reiterate the honor that you've given me by inviting me to this conversation. I'm in a lot of conversations, including television, blah, blah, blah. And frankly, this is a highlight for me because of all of your presence, but frankly, particularly Dr. Curry. Mm-hmm. One of my staff, I'm going to say his name. His name is Duke. His name is Terrence Duke Porter. Carries your book around like Christians carry the Bible. And he's introduced me to seriously, I'm telling you the truth here. And because your work is so powerful, transformative, important, and it's new, it's innovative considerations in the mosaic of the thoughts that we're given, and it's necessary. It literally has life-saving elements to it. And it's in the work of a lot of people. So I want you to know, in case you don't know over there with the Europeans, that your work is taking root, is being considered, it's transformative. There's people who are anti-Black male or considering being anti-Black male who didn't go over to that side because of you. So in case you don't know that, I just want you to know that. And I've discovered more about you mostly through Duke and through my own investigations following that. And I'm honored to be in the same talking space with you, and hope that we'll talk more and be in more talking spaces. It's also been a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Johnson, and be in your space. And I hope to be in your space and hear you as well. And I've also did more investigation of you once Zakiya drafted me.
She'll do that, boy. She'll put you to work.
Into this conversation. But in closing, I'll just be redundant in terms of the core issues that I think are important. As I said before, Black people are in a trance. We've always been in the presence of brilliance and possibility and great recommendations of some sort, even though I think Dr. Curry's stuff is particularly innovative because he has the nerves to care with microscopic brilliance and laser beam focus on Black men's lives. That's weird and new in the Western world in terms of it becoming a book. It's been codified and there's there's references and stuff, unlike bell hooks. Anyway, but the point I want to make is that even with information that brilliant, the white supremacist filter needs to be moved out of the way even deeper so it can synthesize, so we can get it. And I want to reiterate that based on my own work, I've seen Black people, parents who are happenstance parents who are doing harm to their children, just practicing normal anti-Black culture, who changed, who transformed, who became another person because of the proper type of strategy that made them take a second look at what they do. And frankly, Dr. Curry, your book has had people take a second look at what they do as well. And that's an important part of what we do, because even if the advice is wonderful, perfect, and absolutely helpful, we got to come out the transfers on a macro level to have a collective transformation to save ourselves from the monster and beast called white supremacy myth systemology.
I have to say thank you. I'm incredibly humbled to hear you say such great things about my work. You know, I don't know if this is a high note, but I'll say that it's been quite difficult, because it seems that when you write about Black men and boys, someone always wants to pigeonhole you. You know, it's like I can't care about all Black men. You know, so when I study gay Black men or same-sex loving Black men,
same gender loving, my brother.
Same gender loving. See, I don't believe in gender.
That's SGL. Okay, well then let's discuss something along those lines seriously, because it's important. But I'm sorry, go on. I don't want to interrupt you. But don't call me gay, but go on.
No, but I have a deep concern for all black men and boys. And I guess what's so frustrating to me is the amount of violence that we endure, that we tolerate, that we are forced to rationalize, just to live. And I think that I hope if Black Male Studies does anything, is that is exactly you say it takes the pause, that makes people rethink how they're treating each other, and what's being put out in the world and what could be. One of the most heartbreaking things that I think that I've done because of the book, or that's the book's cause, is that so many people whose lives have been saved, who contact me, dealing with issues of police violence, white vigilantes, sometimes domestic and sexual abuse. They tell me how the book's changed their lives, how it saved them. And I guess for me, my wife tells me that sometimes I'm too pessimistic, but I always think, well, what happened if I failed? What happened if I missed that? And it didn't convince someone that was on the brink of ending their life, or, just losing it because of the system. And I think that this is what this young man at desk really represents for us. It's yet another failure, right? It's a failure in our belief. It's a failure in our struggle. But as we know with Black people, because we always do resist, there are more possibilities that's open up. Some that may not happen in our lifetime, some that we can't even perceive right now. But the point is that I think there are Black men changing the way they think about themselves. I see conversations happening on Twitter. I see people on Facebook that see the man not as a way to think, to be a beginning, to think about themselves as more than what the world's offered them. And I think that, unfortunately, books can't stop bullets. And that's just a failure of the kind of thing that we're in. But I do have a kind of a belief that this ends because there are so many people like us, trying to change the narrative, trying to educate people about why the present way of thinking fails. And even if it requires the downfall of America, right, there will still be Black men. And I think that that's what we have to prepare for. We have to prepare for the world where Black men are actually going to be able to be seen as human beings, even if it requires the destruction of our world. So, my thoughts go out to the family of Mr. Arbery. It goes out to every, Black person, and especially goes out to Black men and boys who yet again have to see another demonstration of what the world holds for them. But thank y'all so much for inviting me on. I'm always humbled and feel extremely privileged to be able to have this kind of forum. So thank you.
And I appreciate you guys being willing to do all of this. I thank Zakiya in particular for coming up with the idea and then rallying everybody. Because like I said, when she calls, everybody knows to answer the phone. So much appreciation to Zakiya. I also want to thank, those who are supporting the show. I plan to read you out, but it's not showing up on my list here. So I apologize, but I want to thank everybody that supported the show. And I also want to thank my moderators in the comment section, my wrench crew, because they've been really out there supporting. So particular thanks to BGS, the Criminal Cure, and to Ian. Appreciate that very much. Lastly, the show broadcasts roughly every Wednesday at 5. We're either on Interlight Radio or here on my channel on YouTube. And I usually post some announcements every week before that. So Wednesday at 5 o'clock Pacific, we broadcast here on the Onyx Report. And of course, the show is an advocacy for both Black male studies and Black masculinism, which I'd say the most general definition has to do with humanizing Black men, whether it be for the study of Black men or for the articulation of Black male issues. So please support that. Please acknowledge that. Please go ahead and study and read more about it. And I would definitely say that study should start with the man, not, if nothing else. So with that said, I want to thank everybody again. And I'm going to work to have each of you come back to the show and be interviewed individually when and if you have that kind of time, because there's so much going on in regard to what's happening in the community, what's happening in the world, and particularly the Black males, that there is plenty more to discuss. So thanks again, and I hope everybody out there has a good evening, and we will talk soon. Peace.
Absolutely.
Good night.
It's been a pleasure.
Definitely a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely been a pleasure. We not live no more, right?
We're about to be off right now.